Lin was shocked before the soldiers could even reach him. Lin grabbed the neck of one of them and threw him towards the sword saint. Now, the lady was in a dilemma. If she protected the soldier, she would get hurt, and if she left, then the soldier would get hurt. At the end, the lady decided to jump away and let the soldier get immensely hurt, while she saw that the other reinforcements who were there just a moment ago were now completely blown away by Lin, as he started running away from the human town. The sword saint was saving the soldiers, or what was left of them, and was screaming at the goblin, telling him that if he had got guts, he should stop hiding and face the lady by standing his own ground. But Lin was there to play dirty, and was not going to show any humanity or mercy to the sword saint, utilizing the art of dodging and hurting many human soldiers in the way. Lin knew that at least in terms of speed, he can far surpass the sword saint without doing much efforts. But the sword saint was not at all happy by this behavior of the boy, calling him out as a dirty scoundrel, telling him to stop, wondering about how Lin dared to run away after damaging the life and property of the human town. But in reality, Lin was just waiting for the sword saint's power to finish and her faith to break, so that her defenses can weaken even more. And then, the boy will seize the moment to unleash the blood of ruin attack and transfigure himself to finish the fight, once and for all. The scene shifts to 1 hour later, where we see that the saint was really shattered, as she saw that all the soldiers present in the human town were taken by Lin, and they were screaming in pain and agony while calling out to the lady, begging her to just take their life and end it peacefully, because they were not able to bear the torment of the pain any longer. They wanted the lady to just avenge them, but even the sword saint did not know about how she will do so. Meanwhile, Lin was making fun of the sword saint, telling her that it was such a drag that she had to protect so many humans. So the goblin was making the work easy by killing them instead, and he was trying to tell her that either way, the battle will end in her utter defeat. But now, the lady did not even care, telling Lin to not even think about escaping. But still, Lin knew that the lady was completely broken, and now was the time to do the final move. He threw away one of the soldiers towards her and ran away, and without even thinking anything, the sword saint slashed the soldier instead of Lin to throw him away. And now, Lin was smiling with a devilish face because he knew that his plan was successful. Now, the sword saint was unhinged, and chaos will surely subdue everyone inside of it, as the sword saint was having only one thing in her mind, to take the filthy goblin down. She was now not even looking at what she was doing, slashing multiple soldiers who she swore to protect, only due to her seething rage for the goblin. She was going against her very own code of protecting humanity at all costs. Meanwhile, Lin was able to dodge each and every attack, knowing that there was no way that the sword saint can hit him when she was so angry. He was just smiling contently, while realizing that the sword saint had a knack for killing, which was far more impressive than slaying actual monsters. After a few moments, the sword saint calmed down, and finally, the horrifying realization struck her about what she had done in the fit of rage. Her sword was dropped by her, and she turned around, looking at her hands and realizing that she had taken so many lives and precious souls that she swore to protect instead. And now, the sword saint was actually broken physically and mentally, while she grabbed her head, and Lin realized that this was his moment to shine. Lin smeared some of his blood onto his blade and threw it straight towards the lady, piercing her chest in one strike and making her almost fall onto the ground. Not able to believe at what had happened, the sword saint was powerless, not able to awaken her godly powers anymore, as she slammed down on the ground, and the golden aura started going away in the sky. The sword saint realized that the great divine being had removed its blessings from her head. The lady did not even have enough power to prove that it was not her fault, and that she just promised to protect everyone, but she was not able to do so due to the rage. But she knew that it was too late, and that the divine being had cast aside the legendary sword saint. The lady was not able to take on such harsh reality and fell unconscious onto the ground, while it started raining heavily. On the other hand, our boy Lin was getting happy because finally, the sword saint was corrupted by the ruins of blood, and her divine power was utterly lost due to her lost fate and intentional killing. The boy was not able to believe that even when the sword saint was a woman of incredible strength, she harbors a deadly vulnerability of faith, which was a really dangerous thing. But Lin was thinking about something else and wanted to have some really powerful offspring too. So he wanted to give the Sword Saint even more agony by making her an obedient doll of his, so that the Sword Saint can join the Goblin army, and together they shall topple those who wield power through superstition, or through oppressing the normal human beings, as it shackles the world and does not help anyone else. As the scene shifts, we see that the light rain has turned even more fierce, and it has converted into a thunderstorm, but Lin was unbothered by it, as he was preparing to do some things which was essential with the Sword Saint. Lin's complete body was exposed as he sat down near the lady, getting ready to do his stuff and to increase the number of his children. But suddenly, as Lin was enjoying the experience, the brutal goblin came running towards him and shouting at everyone to run, because the people of the Holy Temple were now coming towards them. Lin was shocked, wondering about what the brutal goblin meant, but it was at this time that Lin heard some rattling noises from behind. And as he turned around, he saw people covered in armors from top to bottom, and they were marching towards the goblin and the Sword Saint in unison, while one of them was looking clearly powerful than the others and was leading them. He immediately got ready with his holy sword and used an attack called the Bishop's Cross, and realizing that it was really going to be dangerous, Lin immediately jumped away, leaving the body of the lady before doing something really terrible to her. Before Lin can actually start the main part, he was interrupted by the bishop, who was not ready to let the Sword Saint become dirty by some goblin's offspring. He was standing near the Sword Saint with the whole team of soldiers, while not being able to believe that even the Sword Saint had to face the misfortune due to the filthy-looking goblin. According to the bishop, Lin was just a little goblin who was having a really fragile and harmless facade. But inside the facade lied a terrifying power and visage, which was incomprehensible by anyone else, making Lin the classic example of a devil. But Lin was not affected by all this senseless talk, because even when he was a human, he was not treated right. The bishop ordered all the sentinels of the temple to channel their energies in the name of the divine, and gather all their strength so that they can guide the world towards peace, and then finally, finish off the filthy goblin. As soon as this announcement was made, the holy soldiers started channeling their strength together, and they were ready to trap Lin and exterminate him forever. Lin knew that something dangerous was going to happen, and the minions started running towards him with insane speeds, not ready to stop, no matter what. They started attacking Lin with their intense barrage of holy swords, but the boy was somehow able to protect himself by the power which was given to him from Ifraya. He was not able to believe that the holy soldiers were wearing such heavy armor, but they were still moving at lightning speed, which made them uncatchable, and along with that, all the sentinels were having an overall strength of 3,000, which was way above the Sword Saint. Lin was not able to comprehend about how someone even powerful than the Sword Saint had arrived to exterminate him. But as the sentinels were swinging their swords and slamming them towards the goblin, he was somehow able to dodge the attacks and made them miss. He realized that the guys were way more powerful than he had ever imagined. But still, Lin was not ready to give up, slitting his hand and throwing his transfusion blood onto the eyes of one of the soldiers, immediately causing his eyes to burn, as the soldier dropped down and started crying in pain and agony, realizing that his divine power was completely decimated due to the overwhelming strength of the transfiguration blood. The bishop saw all this happening in front of his own eyes and ordered all the other sentinels to not follow Lin no matter what, because he was too powerful. Knowing that this was his opportunity, Lin started jumping away and got out of the human town while the soldiers kept watching, realizing that the goblin was truly a demon in the form of a filthy creature. On the other hand, as Lin was running away, he wondered if this was the real strength of the Holy Temple, because even the minions and the sentinels who were on the bottom line had the power level of 3,000 and above. He realized that he needed to overhaul his entire plan and make himself and his goblin army stronger if he wanted to destroy the humans. Meanwhile, the bishop came near the Sword Saint and decided to head back together with her, because the saint had really needed medical guidance, along with the cleansing of her soul, or else the fear inside of her will lead her astray into the abyss. Hearing that, one of the sentinels wondered if they were not going to address the goblin catastrophe, along with the divine attendant, Ifraya, and her disappearance. The bishop covered the body of the lady with a cloth and picked her up, while telling the sentinel that he was already late, and as for the divine assistant, the bishop has chosen the new divine attendant instead of Ifraya, and now there was no need for the holy temple to search for her anymore. As the scene shifts, we come inside the jungle, which was far away from the human town but was near the cemetery. We see that somehow, Lin was able to slowly grab the bodies of the ghost species bulls, and he knew that even when their bodies would have been buried deep. But humans were not doing the good job, and the corpses of the ox demons still remained, which meant that all the goblins can feast to their heart's content and gain new powers, which are going to be interesting to watch. Not able to believe at what had happened, the Sword Saint was powerless, not able to awaken her godly powers anymore, as she slammed down on the ground, and the golden aura started going away in the sky. The Sword Saint realized that the great divine being had removed its blessings from her head. The lady did not even have enough power to prove that it was not her fault, and that she just promised to protect everyone, but she was not able to do so due to the rage. But she knew that it was too late, and that the divine being had cast aside the legendary Sword Saint. The lady was not able to take on such harsh reality and fell unconscious onto the ground, while it started raining heavily. On the other hand, our boy Lin was getting happy because finally, the Sword Saint was corrupted by the ruins of blood, and her divine power was utterly lost due to her lost fate and intentional killing. The boy was not able to believe that even when the Sword Saint was a woman of incredible strength, she harbors a deadly vulnerability of faith, which was a really dangerous thing. But Lin was thinking about something else and wanted to have some really powerful offspring too, so he wanted to give the Sword Saint even more agony by making her an obedient doll of his, so that the Sword Saint can join the Goblin army, and together they shall topple those who wield power through superstition, or through oppressing the normal human beings, as it shackles the world and does not help anyone else. As the scene shifts, we see that the light rain has turned even more fierce, and it has converted into a thunderstorm, but Lin was unbothered by it, as he was preparing to do some things which was essential with the Sword Saint. Lin's complete body was exposed as he sat down near the lady, getting ready to do his stuff and to increase the number of his children. But suddenly, as Lin was enjoying the experience, the brutal goblin came running towards him and shouting at everyone to run, because the people of the Holy Temple were now coming towards them. Lin was shocked, wondering about what the brutal goblin meant, but it was at this time that Lin heard some rattling noises from behind. And as he turned around, he saw people covered in armors from top to bottom, and they were marching towards the goblin and the Sword Saint in unison, while one of them was looking clearly powerful than the others and was leading them. He immediately got ready with his holy sword and used an attack called the Bishop's Cross, and realizing that it was really going to be dangerous, Lin immediately jumped away, leaving the body of the lady before doing something really terrible to her. Before Lin can actually start the main part, he was interrupted by the bishop, who was not ready to let the Sword Saint become dirty by some goblin's offspring. He was standing near the Sword Saint with a whole team of soldiers, while not being able to believe that even the Sword Saint had to face the misfortune due to the filthy-looking goblin. According to the bishop, Lin was just a little goblin who was having a really fragile and harmless facade, but inside the facade lied a terrifying power and visage, which was incomprehensible by anyone else, making Lin the classic example of a devil. But Lin was not affected by all this senseless talk, because even when he was a human, he was not treated right. The bishop ordered all the sentinels of the temple to channel their energies in the name of the divine, and gather all their strength so that they can guide the world towards peace, and then finally, finish off the filthy goblin. As soon as this announcement was made, the holy soldiers started channeling their strength together, and they were ready to trap Lin and exterminate him forever. Lin knew that something dangerous was going to happen, and the minions started running towards him with insane speeds, not ready to stop, no matter what. They started attacking Lin with their intense barrage of holy swords, but the boy was somehow able to protect himself by the power which was given to him from Ifraya. He was not able to believe that the holy soldiers were wearing such heavy armor, but they were still moving at lightning speed, which made them uncatchable, and along with that, all the sentinels were having an overall strength of 3,000, which was way above the Sword Saint. Lin was not able to comprehend about how someone even powerful than the Sword Saint had arrived to exterminate him. But as the sentinels were swinging their swords and slamming them towards the goblin, he was somehow able to dodge the attacks and made them miss, He realized that the guys were way more powerful than he had ever imagined. But still, Lin was not ready to give up, slitting his hand and throwing his transfusion blood onto the eyes of one of the soldiers, immediately causing his eyes to burn, as the soldier dropped down and started crying in pain and agony, realizing that his divine power was completely decimated due to the overwhelming strength of the transfiguration blood. The bishop saw all this happening in front of his own eyes and ordered all the other sentinels to not follow Lin no matter what, because he was too powerful. Knowing that this was his opportunity, Lin started jumping away and got out of the human town while the soldiers kept watching, realizing that the goblin was truly a demon in the form of a filthy creature. On the other hand, as Lin was running away, he wondered if this was the real strength of the holy temple, because even the minions and the sentinels who were on the bottom line had the power level of 3,000 and above. He realized that he needed to overhaul his entire plan and make himself and his goblin army stronger if he wanted to destroy the humans. Meanwhile, the bishop came near the sword saint and decided to head back together with her, because the saint had really needed medical guidance, along with the cleansing of her soul, or else the fear inside of her will lead her astray into the abyss. Hearing that, one of the sentinels wondered if they were not going to address the goblin catastrophe, along with the divine attendant, Ifraya, and her disappearance. The bishop covered the body of the lady with a cloth and picked her up, while telling the sentinel that he was already late. And as for the divine assistant, the bishop has chosen the new divine attendant instead of Ifraya, and now there was no need for the holy temple to search for her anymore. As the scene shifts, we come inside the jungle, which was far away from the human town but was near the cemetery. We see that somehow, Lin was able to slowly grab the bodies of the ghost species bulls, and he knew that even when their bodies would have been buried deep. But humans were not doing the good job, and the corpses of the ox demons still remained, which meant that all the goblins can feast to their heart's content and gain new powers, which are going to be interesting to watch. The system congratulated Lin on reaching level 80, and the scene shifts back to the den, where all the main female waifus were waiting for Lin. And as he arrived, they wanted to know about how the attack proceeded, and if he won, Gabu wanted Lin to spill all the beans along with some white juice, while he told her about what was going on. But the elven mother and daughter noticed that Lin had powered up once again, and was now ever more powerful and had a lot of stamina. Lin smiled and told the ladies that everything was still according to plan, and that he was going to make the sword saint his own in record time. The Goblin Slayer lady was not able to believe that Lin actually defeated the sword saint, and even planted his seeds inside the powerful lad, why for future siblings. But Lin explained that even when he was able to do so in some seconds, he wanted to have a bit more fun, but when things were really heating up, the holy sentinels and soldiers swooped in and whisked the sword saint away. Hearing that, the Goblin Slayer lady immediately started grabbing the shirt from below and wanted Lin to give her some white juice because she cannot wait. But as Lin had already done it with the sword saint, he wanted the ladies to cut him some slack because he had something serious to discuss. Lin started explaining that even when they have achieved a resounding victory and bought precious time for their tribe to grow, they needed to relocate to a new sanctuary, so they don't have to live in fear of human retaliation and retribution. The ladies wondered about where Lin was deciding to go, and hearing that, the boy just smiled, telling the ladies that it was a place where even the most devout of the holy sentinels would not dare to tread lightly. And it was none other than the Grand Tomb, from where the ox species came. As the scene shifts, we come to another settlement of the goblins who escaped from the water den, and now they were getting ready to travel and go to the Grand Tomb. As Lin was watching over all the soldiers, we see that their number has really increased a lot, and Lin started thinking that as the Grand Tomb had a pact with the Holy Temple, they will have to respect each other's boundaries, and as they are not going to attack each other, the conditions were already ripe to forge a massive goblin horde, and now, all that was left was to gather a treasure troop of breeding tools. Lin was referring to the females of various towns in the way. The main thing was to capture the females and not to kill anyone, but if they resisted, then Lin ordered all the goblins to do as they see fit. The whole goblin army was already following Lin's lead and were ready to wreak some havoc while they relocated to the Grand Tomb. In just a few days, they traversed through 10 villages, but they still only managed to gather around 230 females, and it was way lower than the required amount. They were still miles away as Lin did all the analysis, while telling all the others that 700 kilometers along the road, there were 19 villages and 2 towns, so capturing over 1,000 people should be a walk in the park if they used those towns. Just when they were traveling, Lin spotted a little town which was a little ahead of them and decided to raid it. And upon the order of their leader, all the goblins got ready, while Lin wanted the soldiers to wrap it up in record time and hit the road to the grand tomb. As the scene shifts, we come to the same cozy little town, where all the males were gathered along with the mayor as the soldiers were asking the mayor if they really needed to be so dramatic. Because according to the news, it was just a bunch of goblins raiding the village, and anyone can take care of it without any worry. One of the adventurers straight up told the mayor that he had slain so many goblins that he could build a mountain of their bodies this time too. All the other soldiers also thought that this was going to be really easy, not getting ready to fear a bunch of goblins and instead slay them when the time comes. One of the soldiers planned with his companions that they should just wait at the town's gate, and the moment they show up, they should take down one and all without any hesitation. But the soldiers who were doing reconnaissance were already afraid of the goblins, knowing the real terror of Lin and the monsters that he carried for an army. He tried telling all the other soldiers that these goblins were different, and they were clearly terrifying along with being even bigger than any average goblin he had seen before. But one of the adventurers just smiled it off, telling everyone that it was just a minor issue and they did not need to dwell on it, because even if the goblins were strong, the adventurer can take care of it, and he can handle them with ease. We come to know that this person was a level 50 adventurer named Ace, who was already so high up the clouds that he cannot see reality. The mayor noticed something and ordered all the adventurers to get ready, because he knew that the goblins should be passing by the town any moment now. The soldiers stationed at the watchtower looked at the field and announced that the goblins were already inside the town, and Ace was standing in front of all the soldiers, while he decided to have a little contest to see who can slay the most goblins, deciding that the loser will buy drinks for a whole month. But he does not know that he will have to be alive to drink something. But anyways, the people thought that Az was serious, telling him to forget it because they knew that Ace was the strongest of them in the whole town, and no one can hold a candle against him. The man was really getting pumped up, thinking that it was really going to be dull because it was just some goblins. But he still decided to get it done so that he can earn some more money and mayor's favor. He wanted all the other soldiers to take a breather, deciding that whenever the time comes, he will handle the goblins alone. But as he turned around, he saw that all the others were clearly shaking due to fear. And as he turned around again, he saw the large goblin horde which was coming towards them, along with a flying species which was indistinguishable from the distance. As Lin started descending towards the humans, we see that from all the dust and smoke, multiple goblins were charging towards humans with insane speeds, and the adventurer was the first one to fall into his knees, peeing his pants, as he was terrified by the first look of a dragon, not able to believe that such majestic creatures really existed. And another major thing was that the dragons were assisting the goblins in their hunt. All the other soldiers started running for their lives while realizing that the sentinels never told them that the goblins had allies who were clearly monsters. Meanwhile, Ace was not able to stand up, asking all the other companions to wait for him. But this was not enough, as Lin was getting really frustrated, realizing that so many people in the town were already geared up and thought that they could take down the goblin. But now the whole massacre begins, as Lin ordered the soldiers to go inside the town and capture whatever they can find. The goblins started attacking all the houses and the inns where the soldiers were hiding. Meanwhile, the companions of Ace were screaming at him, telling him that he should not have promised to handle the goblins when he cannot do so, and just that and pee his pants over and over. Meanwhile, Ace was not able to understand about why the goblins were so terrifying, when the ones he had killed were always so tiny and measly with almost no brains. He was sure that the attackers were some other species with the facade of being a goblin. But just then, one of the mutated goblins appeared in front of Ace, which made him scream like a terrified girl after looking at a lizard. And before the goblin can even do something to him, the man collapsed and was unconscious. Sarcastically, Lin told the adventurer that he thought that this was going to be fun, but the whole town was massacred in record time without much efforts. Lin and his army finally entered the Grand Tomb, where multiple ghost species monsters welcomed them, or at least were wary of them, not knowing what goblins were doing there. We see their leader, a griffin-like creature, who told Lin that the scent of humanity could draw in all the monsters from miles around. He wondered if this was the goblins' first venture into the Grand Tomb and if they didn't understand the actual danger. But Lin countered by telling the griffin leader that humans, during production, sweat profusely, and that their overwhelming odor could even mask the scent of goblins. Now Lin began to understand why you all should subscribe to the channel, so that you can get the latest chapter of your favorite series the fastest. Lin realized about why the humans were so resistant to and fearful of the Grand Tomb. After seeing so many monsters in one place, Lin knew that no human could surpass them. He bowed down and started explaining to the leader that the ghost species had helped him in many ways, so now he wanted to return the favor. There would be no problems caused by him or his goblins in the Grand Tomb. But suddenly, the griffin saw a horde of humans in the goblin tribe and was furious with Lin, asking why so many humans were present in the Grand Tomb, and whether he understood the pact made between the Grand Tomb and the Holy Temple. The leader wanted to know if Lin actually wanted to die. But Lin immediately explained that they were the Goblin production army, and they were all females, already worn out from continuous production work. Knowing they were harmless, the leader calmed down, telling Lin that if he had any other questions, he should feel free to come to him. In the meantime, the leader would ensure the goblins' safety, allowing them to thrive smoothly in the Grand Tomb. Lin smiled, thanking the leader for letting them stay, addressing him as Lord, and telling the griffin that he was always welcome to visit again. The griffin was pleased after taking a few bags of meat and started flying away, saying he would inform the other esteemed elders in the Grand Tomb. Watching the griffin leader fly off, Lin finally calmed down, knowing that at last he could develop without a care in the world. Lin entered his tent where the newborn goblins were and asked Gabu if she had counted how many there were. The lady informed Lin that there were 3,000 goblins, and if they went for a second production run, they could double that number in no time. But the problem was that after testing 10 mutated species and their progeny from the dominant species, not a single one had survived. Lin knew this would happen, as hybrids were rarely healthy. He understood that the mutated and dominant species could hardly reproduce anymore. So he started leaving the tent, telling Gabu that it was enough for now. They should go and capture some animal monsters and start production with them, so that more lowly goblins could be produced to fill the lower ranks. As the scene shifted to night, we entered the main tent where Lin was resting, thinking that capturing monsters no longer required his personal experience, and that it was much quicker with the simulation system. He ordered the system to initiate life simulation, and the system began booting up, informing Lin that the current storyline had just started and he had stepped into the Grand Tomb. The system told Lin that after enduring countless warships, he had finally found a place to settle down and thrive for the long term. It was time to produce a horde of lowly goblins to expand his power, so Lin began marching into the enchanted forest with his army, ready to capture multiple monsters. They slew them all and took them away to serve as the next generation of goblin cuisine. After a few days, they captured 500 seventh-tier beasts, the flesh-eating rabbits and the crying-face monkeys. On the way back, the goblin army captured a 7th-tier magical beast, the Thunder Mane Bear. Its power soared to an impressive 3,000, making it a strong candidate for enhancing the goblin lineage potential. Lin also snagged several other 7th-tier creatures, significantly boosting the entire tribe's strength. After a month of settling in the Grand Tomb, the tribe had expanded again, and its production tools were increased by another 3,000. But just as the Goblin tribe was basking in the glory of their rapid progress, a surprise attack by the humans damaged much of the Goblin workforce. Lin was shocked after reading this, wondering who had launched the sneak attack. He couldn't believe that even in the Grand Tomb, humans could enter. He wasn't ready to accept that there were humans brave enough to break the treaty. The simulation gave him 3 choices. The first, instead of facing the problem head-on, the goblins would also become sneaky and counterattack. The second, hold the line and fight the humans head-on. The third, clarify the other party's intentions. Lin wanted to choose the third, but the simulation told him that the humans remained silent. By the time the goblins realized what was happening, soldiers were descending from the cliffs one after another, unleashing a brutal massacre on the tribe. Then a few holy guards appeared from both sides, completely surrounding the goblins. After a fierce battle, Lin managed to escape with only a handful of survivors, leaving behind a scene of utter defeat. The simulation awarded him 10 points for choosing the wrong situation, and then it ended. Now Lin was in a dilemma, knowing that the humans had lost their composure. The goblins needed to come up with a plan before it was too late. He got up and stepped outside his tent shirtless. He called out to the brutal goblin and asked him where the griffin leader resided in the grand tomb. The monster obeyed his master and told him that the griffin and his tribe were settling down amidst the towering, majestic trees of the nearby forests. Now that Lin knew the location, he started laughing, knowing that this time the goblins had to seize the opportunity to uproot the thorn in their side. The human town, the empire, and the holy temple would not stop without receiving a proper beating. As the scene shifted to the morning, we saw both Lin and the griffin leader talking together while the creature wondered how Lin knew the humans would show up. Lin had already traversed 1 month of time, but the griffin was still not ready to believe it, thinking that the grand tomb had a pact sealed with the church and thus could not be entered by humans. Lin couldn't tell the leader where he got his information, so he lied, telling the griffin that he had seen the vast army approaching while he was outside. Along with the events that unfolded before the goblins arrived, Lin was certain the humans were coming to challenge them. The griffin decided to trust the goblin leader, unfurled his wings, and went on a reconnaissance mission, telling Lin not to worry because he wouldn't let the humans run wild in the grand tomb. It wasn't just him. The other host species would not allow it either. As he flew away, the griffin told Lin to wait for his report so that he could return and find him. Lin laughed and thanked the griffin leader. Meanwhile, we saw a huge army of humans approaching the grand tomb, led by someone who rallied their morale, telling them they must be ready to fight with all their might and not return until the goblin horde was completely vanquished. Upon hearing that, the whole army screamed and hooted, ready to face the situation no matter what. As the human leader scouted for a way into the grand tomb, he caught sight of a dragon soaring through the skies. It was Lin's mount, silently watching the area from above, ever vigilant, knowing full well the simulation couldn't be wrong. The human leader, a familiar face from the town the goblins had previously ransacked, narrowed his eyes. He wanted to confirm whether Lin was the one commanding the goblins, the mastermind behind the chaos. But Lin, calm and composed, didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked the human if they had forgotten the pact between the grand tomb and the holy temple. But the man unsheathed his sword without hesitation, snarling that exterminating a rat didn't require adherence to some old contract. With thousands of soldiers gathered behind him, the leader scoffed, asking Lin if he truly didn't see the sheer force amassed to crush the goblins. He promised that he would shatter every last one of their bones, all to avenge his grandfather and the Sword Saint. But hearing the name, Sword Saint, only made Lin laugh, dark and wicked. He stepped forward and taunted the leader, telling him that the Sword Saint's taste had been even sweeter than honey when she had screamed in pleasure. That insult ignited the fury of the human leader. He roared at Lin to shut his filthy mouth and turned to his second-in-command, ordering a full assault to reduce the goblins to dust. But the sentinel beside him advised caution, urging him to wait for the scouts to return. Charging into the grand tomb blindly, he warned, was a gamble that could not be taken lightly. Lin's mocking voice cut through the air. He asked if the humans were speaking about someone else, and then, with a smirk, he lifted a corpse high into the air. "Is this the scout you were expecting?" he asked coldly. The scene flashed back to 10 minutes earlier, where 2 human scouts had discovered the goblins' location, watching from a cliff above. They whispered in disbelief, stunned that a mere goblin had managed to gather so many human females, magical creatures, and other powerful species under his banner. No wonder the Sword Saint had fallen prey to Lin's treachery. The scouts agreed to report back immediately, but as they turned to leave, they were ambushed by hybrid goblins and ghost species. The monsters didn't hesitate. The scouts never stood a chance. Back in the present, the sight of the dead scout enraged the human leader. He screamed for his troops to charge into the grand tomb and wipe out every last goblin, pact or not. Wild with rage, he jeered at Lin, claiming that he was trembling in fear. but Lin only laughed harder, amused by the man's delusions. The human leader boomed that this was the price of provoking the mighty lions of the empire, the so-called protectors of humanity. But just as the army prepared to advance, the sky darkened with the shadow of beating wings. The griffin leader descended upon the scene, his voice sharp as a blade as he asked the humans what business they had in the grand tomb. The human leader immediately recognized the danger. This was no ordinary beast. The griffin was one of the grand tomb's ruling species, a man-eater who would not tolerate such disrespect. The griffin questioned whether they had forgotten their sacred contract with the holy temple, a pact that forbade humans from setting foot inside. One of the human soldiers scoffed, declaring that the griffin wasn't even worthy of negotiating with humans. That was the final insult. The griffin's eyes glowed with fury. He told the humans they had grown arrogant in their peace and freedom, but now that era was over. Once the elders of the tomb awakened, they would claim back their power and forge their own empire from under the human's nose. But one of the sentinels stepped forward, warning the griffin that they were here under orders from their superiors to eradicate the goblins. If the griffin stood in their way, then he too would fall. The red-haired human leader, still brimming with confidence, waved his hand and ordered the troops to advance. He believed nothing could stop them. But now the griffin had enough. He soared into the sky, his voice a thunderous roar as he called the humans fools for thinking they could waltz into the grand tomb as if it were their playground. He summoned his army, and in an instant, a wall of ghost species appeared, towering, monstrous figures standing between the humans and their prey. The human sentinel faltered. He couldn't believe it. The monsters of the grand tomb had chosen to shield the goblins, but the leader was too deep in his rage to care. He believed he could slaughter them all. Still, the sentinel leaned in, quietly urging the prince to retreat. The casualties would be too great if they fought now. The young prince stared at him, stunned. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The proud lions of the empire retreating from monsters. It felt like betrayal. To him, soldiers existed to fight to the last breath, not turn tail. But the sentinel reassured him this wasn't a retreat, but a strategic withdrawal. They would return, stronger, better armed, and prepared for a full-scale war. As the human army pulled back, Lin watched from the shadows above, a wry grin playing on his lips. He turned to the griffin, casually remarking that all of this seemed a bit excessive. There was no need to go so far for goblins who could clearly protect themselves. But the griffin only laughed, his eyes gleaming with newfound resolve. He explained that this was the perfect chance to send a message to the humans. The monsters of the grand tomb would no longer cower in fear. The griffin then turned serious and told Lin to hurry up and expand his tribe. A great battle was on the horizon and they would need his strength. The higher-ups were watching him closely. If Lin became the Goblin King, he would earn the right to enter the true depths of the grand tomb, where the real treasures awaited. A wicked smile spread across Lin's face. Red energy began to swirl around him. He could already taste the power waiting in the shadows below. The scene shifted to the Holy Temple's grand hall, where chaos roared among the crowd. Angry humans pressed against the guards, their voices rising as they demanded the execution of the Sword Saint. To them, she had become unworthy of wielding the sacred blade. They remembered the horror in the town, not the goblins she was meant to fight, but humans she had turned her blade upon. Whispers of her betrayal had spread like wildfire, rumors that she had lain with a goblin and now bore its child. The woman they once revered had revealed her true face, they said, using human lives as shields while protecting monsters. Within the temple, the chief hurried through the corridors, muttering grimly that the problems never ceased, one arriving before the other could be resolved. He entered the inner chamber, calling for the Sword Saint, only to stop short when he saw her cradling a newborn goblin in her arms. The child was hers, born of the very creature they sought to exterminate. He stared at her in disbelief, thinking that if he had foreseen this disgrace, he would have stopped it long before it came to pass. But now it was too late. He warned her to step away, claiming the goblin child might be dangerous. And as he drew his sword with heavy reluctance, he was stunned when the woman blocked him immediately, protecting her child with a quiet, fierce determination. He tried to reason with her, urging that for the sake of the people, the temple, and the future of the empire, she must abandon this madness and return to the righteous path. But she had already turned her back on that road. Her voice was cold and calm as she grabbed his sword and turned it against him, warning that if punishment was inevitable, she would accept it, but she would not surrender the child. just as the tension reached its peak, a burst of golden light surged through the room. A sacred technique had been invoked, supreme sacred technique, and the radiance struck Alice, disorienting her. The chief turned, stunned, to see the cardinal standing at the doorway, his divine power still shimmering in the air. As Alice blinked through her daze, the chief stepped aside, telling the cardinal that he would leave the matter to him, for it was too painful to bear. But Alice, regaining her senses, refused to yield. She said she would accept divine judgment herself, acknowledging that her secret power was no more and her former glory was gone. The cardinal, however, told her that it was not divinity that had abandoned her, but she who had turned her back on it. Without hesitation, he extended his hand toward the child and declared he would purify the filth. A pulse of holy magic radiated outward, draining the goblin infant's life force with chilling efficiency. Alice, still too weak to act, could do nothing but watch in horror, her arms trembling as she reached out in vain. Outside, the crowd still murmured, waiting anxiously for a verdict. When the chief emerged from the temple, the gathered humans cheered, assuming justice had been carried out. But their cheers fell to silence as the chief tossed the limp, lifeless body of the goblin child onto the stone steps. Gasps rose from the crowd as they stepped back, the sight silencing them more effectively than any decree. The chief's voice carried across the courtyard as he told them that he had delivered the justice they demanded, and warned that any further slander against the former sword saint would bring severe consequences. The crowd, cowed and confused, dispersed in silence. Within the temple's throne room, a servant rushed to report that Alice had vanished after breaking out of her confinement. The chief listened in disbelief, shaken by the turn of events. Far away in the goblin tribe's domain, a mutated goblin boasted to Lin that he had unlocked magic, but the others were more interested in reaching level 70. Lin, lounging atop a boulder, watched them with half-lidded eyes and a smirk. He reminded them that the enchanted forest was crawling with magical creatures and told them flatly that if they wanted power, they'd have to go out and earn it. He mocked their soft behavior, saying they'd become lazy and ungrateful, caring more about levels than survival. They should be praising him, not whining. The goblins hesitated, clearly afraid. They knew what the enchanted forest held: death lurking behind every shadow. But Lin's aura flared a deep red, his tone sharpening as he asked if they were seriously talking back to him, their leader, without even considering the consequences. That was all it took. The goblins bolted, scattering toward the forest in fear. Even those not assigned to the task fled, not wanting to provoke Lin's wrath. He sighed, watching them go, thinking that they all just wanted to leech off of him anyway. As he turned, he saw a familiar figure, wings beating slowly as it descended. The Griffin Lord had returned. Lin blinked, wondering aloud what had brought the beast here this time. The Griffin landed with a sly grin and told him that he had someone to introduce, another lord whom Lin would benefit from meeting. Lin's grin widened. Making new acquaintances meant more names to throw around when things got rough. It was a perfect opportunity to build political cover. If a threat ever appeared that he couldn't handle, he could simply invoke the name of one of these powerful lords. The Griffin gestured for him to turn, and there stood a giant reptilian creature, shimmering gold in the sunlight. It was the golden-haired lizard master, a subhuman race with a recorded power level of 3,990. Lin appraised the lizard calmly. Not the strongest he'd seen, but certainly worth entertaining. The creature moved with a purpose, its eyes fixed in the direction of the human settlements. Lin tilted his head slightly, asking if the lizard was intrigued by the humans, and the Griffin Lord nodded in affirmation. As the lizardman started going towards the human captives in the cage, he told the Griffin that the humans were looking absolutely delectable. So the lizardman proposed that they should just split the humans in half and not give anything to the goblin. But the Griffin informed Lin that the lizardman was not subscribed to the channel, so he did not get the latest chapter of his favorite series the fastest. The lizard had told him before that he wanted just one human, and that it would be enough. But now the lizardman was actually getting really greedy, telling the duo that in his domain, everything was his to take, and goblins were just some lowly, worthless tribe who were nothing more than insects. But still, the Griffin stopped the lizard and his filthy plans, telling him that as he was in charge of the North District, the lizards should head back to the south and keep watch over there. Hearing that, the lizard was actually getting annoyed. telling the griffin to stop pretending, as the bird's kind has not even tasted human flesh yet, and they still dare to call themselves the cannibal griffins. The lizard was not ready to give up, telling the man that he was more than fair by giving half of the humans to the griffin and taking the other half himself, wanting to know from the griffin if he agreed to the idea. The lizard was ignoring our boy Lin like your ex ignores you, but the boy was not really going to give up, calling out to the lizard. And as he turned around, the creature saw that Lin was full of a fiery aura, asking the griffin about where the creepy reptile came from and why he wanted half of his captives, wondering if the lizard can even digest that much, and if he knows how precious they actually were. Hearing that, the lizard turned around, looking at Lin with anger and asking him if he was talking to the Lord Lizardman himself. The creature was considering Lin a lowly trash breed, but before the boy could even show him his place, the Lord Griffin intervened and stopped Lin from showing his true powers. He told the lizard for the last time that he should hurry up and get out of the North District, or else the griffin was afraid that the lizard would end up with more than what he could handle. The filthy reptile was still not getting the seriousness of the situation, suspecting that the griffin just wanted to claim all the humans that Lin had got for himself. So he decided to slay the little goblin leader in front of him first, so that then they could divide the humans together. But hearing that, as Lin was actually getting furious, the griffin started attacking the lizard before Lin could do anything due to the fear of our boy's true potential. The lizard was somehow able to protect himself, complimenting the griffin for being ruthless. But he knew that the griffin could not keep protecting the place every time. So when he would not be guarding, the lizard would be back, and then he would take all the humans instead of only half of them. Even the griffin did not expect him to be so greedy, so he apologized to Lin and told him that the lizard's greed knows no bounds. But Lin told him not to apologize for someone else, because if the boy wanted to kill him right now, he wondered about what the folks in the Grand Tomb would do. After some thinking, the griffin told Lin that if he overpowers the lizard men, then he can probably become the southern god of the Grand Tomb, and then all the area would be in his command. Lin wondered if, after becoming the Southern Lord, he would get to slay the monsters, because he knew that the moment he became a lord, he couldn't just go on a wild rampage with his subordinates slaying monsters like he did right now. Lin smiled and told the griffin that he does not need any help from him. And as the scene shifts, we see multiple corpses of the ghost species, and the carcass slide on the ground while the hybrid goblins were eating the flesh out of them and evolving themselves. One of the hybrid goblins evolved with a purple aura surrounding him, as he felt that he had grown a lot taller than before. The hybrid wanted to test out his powers, and he started swinging his lethal tail, which was having multiple pointy blades embedded onto it. With only one swing of the tail, he was able to cut off a whole section of the forest. And now, he was able to summon blades all over his body, and he realized that his power had been significantly amplified after devouring such powerful beings. As the scene shifts, we come to the southern area of the Grand Tomb, where we see one small reptile who is going inside and out of a river for hunting its prey. But suddenly, the reptile was astonished as he saw a goblin's hand approaching him, and in just a split of a moment, the creature who was making the family his prey had become prey itself. After hunting, we see that it was none other than the hybrid goblin who was devouring the flesh of the reptile. And even when this one was a bit smaller than the others, he was already over a meter tall and was having deliciously flavorful and naturally fresh meat, along with a slight sweetness. The other goblins were also eating their prey while complimenting the flavor, which was absolutely delicious, telling the others that it was on par with what humans can cook out of chicken or any other meat. One of the goblins was so fulfilled by this meal that he wanted to eat more. And suddenly the trio of the hybrid goblins got an idea, and they had a devilish laugh on their face, which was completely evil. As the scene shifts to the swamps of the southern area, a reptile mother was finding her child, while one of the reptilians informed her that her unfortunate kid was running wild every day. So it was a really bad situation. The citizen just hoped that the kid does not get snatched up by some monster who was lurking outside. But hearing that, instead of getting worried, the female was laughing, telling the citizen that as her husband was a lord, there was no monster who would dare to do anything to her child. Or if they do so, they should face severe consequences. But suddenly, out of the bushes, a voice called out to the female, asking her if she was looking for something. and then the carcass of a reptile got thrown towards her, and she realized that it was her son and no one else. The female reptile wanted to know about what kind of monster the hybrid was, barring him and threatening him by telling him that the child he devoured was of the Southern Lord. But the hybrid goblin was as arrogant as he could be, wondering about what was it all about. He instead started hitting on the reptilian lady, telling her that she was looking absolutely stunning with that terrified look on her face. But as soon as the reptilian soldier heard it, he grabbed a spear from his room and wanted to execute the goblin for daring to challenge their lords and showing utter disrespect to his wife. The soldier called out to the others and started going towards the goblin to finish him. But before he could move even an inch further, one of the assassination hybrid goblins got him from behind and pierced his heart out of his chest. Before the soldier could do anything, he was completely helpless and lifeless, while two hybrid goblins surrounded the reptilian female. And the bigger one grabbed her mouth, realizing that the really delicate females should be saved for their boss, Lin. But the lady was not ready to give up, calling out to all the other soldiers and crying for help. All the other soldiers of the reptilian clan started surrounding the three hybrid goblins, who realized that a monstrous invasion was upon them. And they also knew that the hybrids belonged to the goblin clan. But as their lord was away, they wondered about what they should do. Knowing that it was not a good idea, the soldiers still did not have a choice and decided to forget it and just grab their weapons to fight back. The reptiles were not happy with the infiltration of the goblins. Getting ready to fight them off and thinking they would deal with some measly goblins easily, the soldiers started running toward them. But they did not know the real powers of these troublemaking goblins. One of them started surrounding himself with a blue aura and caused multiple explosions. Another one of the spiky goblins began throwing his spikes in all directions, damaging and poisoning multiple lizard guards, then eating them as soon as they got unconscious. One of the lizard soldiers thought he was going to get the upper hand by stabbing the goblin in the back while he was still eating his prey, but he didn't know that the goblin was faking it. He knew the lizard was behind him all along. As soon as he came closer, the goblin immediately struck his knife through the soldier's head, making the top fly off like a spinning Beyblade and instantly rendering him lifeless. The whole lizard tribe was destroyed. The goblins ate and enjoyed until they were full. The three of them decided to head back to the goblin drive, because Lin had told them not to wipe out any of the species completely and instead just wait for them to breed, so they could come back later and have immense growth once again. Meanwhile, the huge hybrid goblin had both the mother and daughter of the lizard lord, deciding to take these female lizards back to the boss so that he would get appraisal and compliments in the tribe. As the scene shifted, we saw that one of the soldiers was still alive, even though his hand was amputated. As he somehow gained consciousness, he saw that the lizard lord was back, wondering where on earth he had been before. As the scene shifted again, we saw the lizard lord wondering what had happened to his tribe. As he looked around, he saw destruction and mayhem. He stopped in his tracks, growing slow and shocked at the same time. Out of the fallen soldiers, one of them immediately ran toward the lizard lord, telling him to hurry and save his wife and daughter because they had been captured by the goblins when they raided the lizard tribe. The lord could not believe that the goblins he had thought were measly were the ones who had taken his wife and daughter. He thought it was impossible, as he had just returned from the goblin tribe, and he believed there was no way their measly goblin leader would send someone back for revenge so quickly. According to him, those inferior creatures would not even dare come to the reptile tribe because they were far superior. This made the lord's blood boil as he wore an angry look on his face and started sniffing around for the scent of his lady and daughter. He realized that their scent was intertwined with the aroma of goblins, and he feared something naughty might have happened. The lord immediately started running, realizing that the goblins had indeed raided the village, and that it wasn't false. He decided to take revenge for what the goblins had done and swore that he would wipe out their entire clan. As the scene shifted, we saw Lin sitting outside his tribe with a pot full of food for every member. The three hybrid goblins arrived as they told their boss Lin that they had brought him something special to taste. Lin was shocked but smiled when he realized that the three hybrid goblins had evolved even further. One of the mutated goblins was now a level 71 bone warrior with divine blessings and vitality, along with the gene-devouring skill. Another goblin was actually the perfect assassin at level 72, with the camouflage scale and winged acceleration. Lin had never expected that one of the goblins would actually reach the power of his wife, Gabu, so easily, especially since, after all, he was just a mutated breed. But these hybrids had far surpassed Lin's expectations. Now the boy was happy. He knew that even if the goblin's attributes were lacking, its overall strength had caught up to that of the female goblin, probably due to his intense growth. He saw that the assassin goblin had also gained some new skills, which were a notch above the previous ones. Lin knew that if he gave gear to this goblin, he would become even stronger. But suddenly, Lin's train of thought was interrupted as he heard a feminine voice from a distance, a lady screaming at the goblins to let her go. We saw that it was the giant hybrid goblin who had actually grabbed the wife and daughter of the lizard lord. She couldn't believe she had been kidnapped, especially as the lady of the lord, and she believed all the goblins would be wiped out, not a single one spared. Hearing this annoyed the giant goblin. He grabbed the female's ears and made her stop. He brought her near Lin, telling him that he had brought a special treat, really fresh and tender, both just ripened and seasoned to the right amount so Lin could enjoy. Lin started smiling, wondering where the hybrid had found these two females, but then realized they were from the lizard tribe. Even before the hybrids could answer, the female started laughing, telling Lin that her husband was the lord of the South Realm and that Lin should be scared of him, but still, he would not be spared. Finally, Lin smiled and told the lady that her lord was the one who had threatened to carve up Lin's goblin tribe and take his beloved human females for himself. This shattered the lizard lady, who realized how bad her husband really was. But she still refused to give up, telling Lin that a mere goblin would meet his end soon. Now, the boy was truly annoyed. He immediately took out his crossbow, which had a paralyzing arrow in it, and shot it straight through the stomach of the female, making her paralyzed but still conscious. Lin decided not to keep the female for himself, but instead gave the two lizards to the whole goblin tribe so they could have a feast and enjoy themselves as much as they liked. The goblins were drooling as they thanked their leader for the generous gift. The whole tribe started running and screaming, each wanting to be the first to taste the tender flesh. The lady couldn't even scream as the goblins devoured her bit by bit, growing stronger through her flesh. Now, Lin wondered what the hybrids had done to the lizard tribe if they had just snatched up the two females. The giant goblin started explaining that they just happened to run into the lizard tribe while hunting and had pretty much taken care of them all. But, as Lin had instructed, they did not finish off all of them. A few were left alive to breed so the goblins could come back and eat them once they had multiplied. At first, Lin was shocked, and the hybrid goblins thought they had made a terrible mistake, immediately apologizing. But then Lin laughed his heart out, telling the hybrids that it was truly magnificent and worth raising them because they actually knew how to catch fun little treasures and bring them back. The three hybrids realized they were safe and began praising their lord for being so kind and not punishing them. For Lin, he was really getting excited, wondering what the reptilian lizard lord would do next after threatening the goblin tribe, only to return and find his home destroyed instead. As the scene shifted, we saw the lizard man arriving, breaking the front defenses of the tribe in anger. He ran around, screaming at the goblins to bring back his wife and daughter. But his anger quickly turned to horror as he saw multiple goblins eating two bodies, those of his wife and daughter. This time, Lin was laughing as he approached the lizard man, telling him that he had arrived, but too late. The deed was already done. The lizard man, furious, shouted back that he would wipe out every last one of the goblin tribe today. As he said this, the lizard began powering up with a green aura, hurling something poisonous and gaseous toward Lin at intense speed. Lin was glowing with a blue aura as he pushed through the attack of the giant lizardman. The assault left him heavily wounded, but he kept going. The lizard's head twisted from the unexpected strike, but Lin wasn't ready to back down. He turned around and prepared for another charge, sprinting toward the lizard and stabbing it directly in the chest so it would begin to feel pain, and so that Lin could enjoy the sight. Though injured, the lizard managed to dodge the follow-up attack that aimed to cut its throat. It wondered how a mere goblin could possess such strength. Even though Lin had only attacked with a knife, the force had nearly knocked it unconscious, something that should not have happened. Meanwhile, Lin was laughing, though still alert, telling the lizard that since it had been so eager to start trouble, the goblin would be happy to oblige. The lizard, now positioned to the east, realized it couldn't summon other reptiles to support it, which was actually a tactical advantage for the goblin. Still, the lizard was getting increasingly angry at Lin's taunts. It didn't understand how this goblin was so confident, even claiming that he could take it down without needing help. Enraged, the lizard stood up again, the wound in its chest still open, and began powering up as a neon green aura surrounded its body. The energy boosted its strength and healed all the injuries it had suffered so far. The transformation was complete. It no longer looked like a lizardman, but more like a dragon without wings, a long-headed creature with a large tail. This new form came with power so intense that the creature felt it could overwhelm anything. It believed Lin would now truly struggle just to stand in front of it. The hybrid goblins watching nearby also sensed that this aura wasn't normal. They realized that the creature was no longer just a tough opponent, it had become something far more difficult to defeat. Lin, however, remained cautious. He planned to use an earth elemental attack to stop the lizard's movement, then inject it with the blood of ruin so that he could trigger a transfiguration. By then, the lizard would be reduced to a lifeless shell. But before anything else could happen, something surprising occurred. The lizard was suddenly stabbed from behind, right through the middle of its chest. Even Lin was caught off guard, unable to immediately understand what had just happened. The wound was so severe that the lizard again approached unconsciousness. Then, before it could make sense of what was happening, a golden sword radiating holy energy sliced it cleanly in two. As the lizard's body began to fall apart, it became clear who had done it. The one standing behind the lizard and in front of Lin was none other than the Sword Saint, her holy sword still glowing. She was still dressed in torn clothing, her expression mentally strained, but her eyes focused on Lin. She called out to him, clearly relieved to have found him. Immediately, the two hybrid goblins stepped forward, realizing that the Sword Saint had somehow broken through into the goblin tribe. They understood they would need to shield Lin. However, they also knew that if the Sword Saint chose to fight them, they wouldn't make it out alive. Before they could do anything, the Sword Saint suddenly fell silent and then collapsed to the ground, fainting. She didn't even seem aware of where she was. Lin could hardly believe it. She had made it all the way into the Grand Tomb, and though worn out, had still managed to perform such a powerful strike. Even Lin, the goblin leader, found himself silently thanking the gods that she had passed out. Otherwise, the outcome might have been disastrous. One of the larger hybrid goblins suggested this was the perfect chance to finish her off now that she had fainted. But when he called the others to help, they slowly began backing away, more afraid of the unconscious woman than interested in taking action. Two of them turned toward a bench and started talking about how bench-like the bench looked, and how the sky was particularly sky-like today. They invited the larger one to join them in discussing the wonders of nature. Lin cut through the scene, telling the hybrids that they should be ashamed of themselves. He reminded them that even though the Sword Saint had fainted, they were still afraid, and now wanted to kill her without the resolve to do it properly. Instead, Lin calmly sat down with a smile, saying that her life held more value than her death. He ordered that the lady be tied up immediately and prepared for interrogation. The scene shifted into one of the tents. The Sword Saint lay in the center, still tied up. Lin and Gabu were inside while the hybrid goblins stayed far away, not daring to come near her. Gabu stared at the Sword Saint with curiosity, noting how smooth and soft her skin was. It didn't feel like a warrior at all. Gabu's eyes sparkled as she realized that the Sword Saint's entire body had that same delicate texture. It was almost like a shimmering sensation. Eventually, the Sword Saint began to stir, slowly opening her eyes. Lin smiled as the Goblin Slayer lady stood quietly nearby. When the Sword Saint looked around, Lin asked what she was doing here. But as soon as she saw him, she smiled. She said she was happy she had found the Goblin leader, clearly relieved and content. Lin remained cautious. He warned her not to move recklessly and reminded her that she was too worn out to take on anyone. But the Sword Saint didn't react violently. Instead, she looked genuinely happy just to see him. Even Lin was unsure what was going on with her. He turned to the hybrid goblins, irritated. He told them that after everything he'd done to take care of them, this was how they repaid him, by standing around and starring like it was some sort of show. He demanded they restrain her again. But before anyone could act, the sword saint was suddenly gone from her restraints, moving with speed no one could follow. One moment she was tied up, the next she crouched in front of Lin, looking down at something near his waist. Lin flinched, startled, while the hybrids realized they were doomed. If the sword saint didn't kill them, their leader Lin surely would, for being so inattentive on the battlefield. The sword saint Alice immediately dropped onto the ground, shocking even our boy Lin, the goblin leader. As Alice told him that she was not there to fight with the goblins, but instead, she hoped that Lin could once again help her. The boy wondered about what kind of help Alice wanted, and she told him with a wicked and broken smile that she wanted another child and asked Lin if he could give it to her once again. This shocked both Lin and the goblin slayer along with Gabu, who were not able to believe that Alice was actually the sword saint who was kneeling in front of her biggest enemy. And if this was not enough, she was pleading for another baby when it should be considered filth for a holy maiden. Even Lin was not able to believe this at all, wondering if the sword saint was playing some kind of prank on him, and if she thought that the boy was a fertility god or something. But Alice was dead serious and told Lin that the hatred they had between them could be wiped clean with a single stroke, and they just needed to have a fun time. This way, it would be mutual benefit. Alice would get another child and Lin would get to enjoy her once again. But the condition was really strict. She definitely needed to have a child no matter how hard the fertility rates were, and she was not going to settle for just being a doll for the goblin. And if it would be fulfilled, then Lin could enjoy her however many times he wanted. But Lin was shocked, wondering about how Alice could even give birth to their child, and where did it go if it was born. This made the sword saint snap in anger and frustration, while she started screaming once again to the great deity that she was sorry, and that she didn't fulfill the punishment and was stripped of her powers. She thought that it was all those wretched commoners' fault, so she wanted the great deity to give her one more chance to fulfill her punishment. She thought that giving birth to a goblin and raising it right was actually her punishment. Lin understood what was going on. He realized that the holy temple had stripped the sword saint of her power, leading to her mental breakdown and making her mistakenly believe that it was the gods who were punishing her instead. And now Alice was turning her brain into a coping mechanism, trying to escape the real truth of life. And as she had also slain innocent people, then the mental breakdown was imminent. But Lin decided to use it in his favor, telling the sword saint that she had slain so many of her own people, so the gods would surely be furious. However, if she wanted to redeem herself by asking for a child of the goblin leader, then there were conditions to consider. But without even listening, the sword saint was ready to fulfill any conditions that Lin would tell her. Lin started explaining to Alice that she must heed his words, at least during the period of atonement and while raising the goblin child, and Lin believed that this could be seen as a punishment bestowed upon her by the divine himself. Lin was smiling devilishly while telling this to the lady, knowing that she would fall for it. But with such incredible combat power delivered right to his doorstep, Lin was not ready to not take any advantage of the situation. And even Alice agreed to all the conditions, telling Lin that as long as it was the divine punishment, she was ready to embrace it wholeheartedly. Lin started smiling, realizing that he would be having some really good and tight fun. He told everyone to go away and step outside the tent for a moment while he started going to bed along with Alice, so that they could prepare for the fun they were going to have. Meanwhile, the hybrid goblins were shocked along with the goblin slayer and Gabu about how easily the sword saint was manipulated. As the scene shifts, everyone was out and Alice started taking away her tattered clothes because they were revealing everything already. She lay down in an embarrassing position, but this was making Lin really stiff down there. The lady wanted our boy to lend her a hand, but Lin decided to lend her his rod instead. And since Alice was the one who wielded the holy blade and was having a lot of explosive power, Lin decided to not hold back at all and enjoy having all the fun. Alice screamed and moaned in pleasure while she was out of breath a few minutes later. As the scene shifts again, we see that the goblin slayer lady was just standing outside the tent listening to all those moans while the dragon girl appeared, asking the goblin slayer to stop joking around because Alice was the sword saint and was the mightiest of all the sword saints throughout history. But now that the voices died down, the goblin slayer lady decided to let the dragon go inside and have a look for herself. And this made the dragon girl scream in surprise, as she saw that Alice was calmly sleeping with a long cloth covering her body. She was having the sleep of her life, while the dragon was not able to believe that the Sword Saint had finally been captured by the Goblin leader, Lin. Even the Goblin Slayer lady told her that, seeing as believing, she had to be convinced now. She knew that if this news reached the Empire, it would stir up a kind of storm that would not be controllable. Both ladies decided to do nothing about it. As the scene shifts, we see Lin sitting outside near the jungle with Gabu standing beside him. Gabu asked Lin if she should arrange something for the Sword Saint. Lin thought about it for a moment while holding a cup of glass, telling Gabu that she would have to make sure the Sword Saint stayed at Lin's place, just in case she tried to bolt or pull any wild stunts at night. First, Gabu would have to take her to change into fresh clothes and have a nice shower so that she could be happy for a while, helping with the delusion. Gabu agreed and started going toward the tent where the Sword Saint was sleeping, while Lin began drinking. Lin turned around, telling Gabu that many humans had died recently, and it would not be good for their goblin production farm, so they needed to do something about it. Gabu realized what Lin wanted to say and started going away while agreeing to it. As Lin was alone, he started thinking about everything once again. He knew that when the Lord of the Reptiles was absent from his ruling region, the whole southern region would surely stir up great chaos. Now, Lin needed to pay a visit to the Griffin to grab the attention of the Grave Lord. As the scene shifts, we come to the flesh-eating Griffin tribe. We see that as the bird was dealing with her huge monster, she was shocked to learn that Lin had killed the Southern Lord. Even when Lin tried to explain, the Griffin told him there was no need to do it, because even when the situation was tangled, there was still a glimmer of hope. If Lin could take the place of the Lizard Lord, they might just have a shot at making things right over by the Grand Tomb. But Lin was not actually interested in ruling any part of the Grand Tomb and wondered if letting one of his subordinates handle it would work. The Griffin looked at the bags of meat Lin had brought, then again at the Goblin leader, telling him it was not impossible, but sending his subordinates instead of himself could be really risky. Lin wondered what was so risky about not going himself. This was when the Griffin started explaining that the Dream Demon of the Southern region had long coveted the position of the Southern Lord. With the demise of the Lizard Lord, the Dream Demon would undoubtedly try to grab the lordship of the Southern region. The Griffin believed that if Lin went there and competed, he could defeat the Dream Demon, but for his subordinates to do so was not so lucky, and they would be greatly affected by it. First, Lin wondered what the Dream Demon even was, what kind of creature it was. The Griffin explained that the Dream Demon was an 8th-level creature capable of manipulating dreams. It could wield the power of dreams to manipulate a person's consciousness. However, since their fighting skills were lacking, they had never been able to take down the Lizard Lord or any other lord to establish their own position. But for Lin, controlling dreams and consciousness was actually intriguing. He thought that if he could plant a hint in the dreams of the Sword Saint, compelling her to follow his command, it would be perfect. Alice would never even think of betraying Lin. Lin had a smile on his face as he told the Griffin Lord that he wanted to meet the Dream Demon as soon as possible and wanted the bird to take him to the creature, because he wanted to team up with the Dream Demon. As the scene shifts, we see Lin and the Griffin drop down onto the ground of a wild forest full of purple miasma. The Griffin explained to Lin that the place they were at was the dwelling place of the Dream Demons and their leader. As both the Griffin and Lin descended into the eerie jungle, a strange, unsettling energy began to stir. Hovering silently in the shadows, a mysterious figure observed them with growing suspicion. He couldn't comprehend how intruders had managed to pass through his territory. Contemplating whether they needed to be lulled into a sugary sweet dream that would last for eternity, the creature's presence grew heavier. This was no ordinary being. This was the Dream Demon, an undead entity of level 84, feared throughout the Grand Tomb. The demon narrowed his eyes, surprised to see a man-eating griffin and a goblin, of all creatures, daring to trespass. A goblin was far too filthy and lowly to be allowed anywhere near his realm, and yet here one was, riding alongside the griffin as if he belonged. But Lin stood his ground, calm and unaffected by the demon's disdain. He spoke with a quiet confidence, explaining that he had no intention of fighting. Instead, he proposed a deal. If the dream demon could assist him in manipulating a certain individual's dreams, he would grant him dominion over the southern region of the Grand Tomb, making him the Southern Lord for eternity. The dream demon scoffed, offended by the notion that a mere goblin had the audacity to make offers. As with many monsters in this chaotic world, he underestimated Lin, convinced that someone so insignificant couldn't possibly tell him what to do. That was when the Griffin stepped in, his tone sharp with amusement. He casually revealed that the Lizard Lord, the same powerful monster who had slaughtered the Dream Demon's entire clan and had been his rival for years, had been slain. And not by an army or a legendary warrior, but by the very goblin standing before him, Lin. The demon froze, unable to believe it at first, thinking the Griffin was trying to trick him. But as realization settled in, a twisted smile stretched across his face, and he began laughing wildly. The thought that his old enemy had been defeated at last filled him with such overwhelming joy that he didn't hesitate to accept Lin's offer. He promised that he could manipulate the dreams of even the mightiest beings, and if all Lin needed was control over one human, then the task would be laughably simple. As the dream demon basked in his newfound ambition, the Griffin turned to Lin once again, bowing respectfully and announcing that he would return to the Grand Tomb for now. Yet he paused, hesitant, and asked if Lin truly intended to make the dream demon a Southern Lord. The Griffin voiced a quiet warning that if Lin thought the demon was tame just because they hadn't fought yet, he was making a grave mistake. In a real battle, Lin's odds would be slim. The dream demon could summon hordes of monsters by distorting reality itself, and that kind of manipulation wasn't something to take lightly. Lin, however, simply asked him to wait a bit longer. He had just experienced a sudden surge of inspiration, something like a master plan forming in the back of his mind. The dream demon, meanwhile, was gleefully celebrating his new status, fantasizing about the power and control that would soon be his. But the Griffin's eyes narrowed as he watched Lin closely. He began to wonder whether Lin was truly there to collaborate, or if he was thinking of doing something far more dangerous. Absorbing the powers of a creature like the dream demon wasn't just bold, it was suicidal. Still, Lin stood silently, examining the transparent interface of his system window, which now hovered before him. One of his unique skills allowed him to absorb a part of his opponent's body and merge it with his own, each granting him a stat boost. However, the system clearly noted that he couldn't acquire innate abilities, only the physical enhancements. Lin smirked faintly. It was true that a regular goblin would never dare try to devour the power of a dream demon, but he was no ordinary goblin. He believed he could do it no problem. Approaching the demon, he casually suggested they get to know each other better before moving forward. After all, if they were to work together effectively, he needed to understand exactly how the dream demon's abilities functioned. Lin made it sound like a reasonable request, one meant to strengthen their collaboration. Pleased by the attention, the dream demon let out a cackle. He explained that his dream manipulation relied entirely on eye contact. Once someone looked into his eyes, there was no escape, not unless their will was as strong as steel, or unless he himself decided to release them. But Lin had already begun smiling, his expression shifting into something far darker. Without warning, he drew his blade and lunged forward, claiming that while dreams might be impressive, the goblin leader's sword was faster than lightning, and he was ready to take the risk. The Griffin shouted in panic, telling Lin not to look into the demon's eyes, but it was already too late. The dream demon had activated his ability, and Lin's body froze mid-strike. The trap had been sprung, and the goblin was caught in its web. From within his mind, Lin was pulled into a surreal dreamscape, his vision flickering until he found himself standing in the middle of a molten wasteland. A giant lava volcano loomed above, spewing fire and smoke as rivers of magma flowed violently around him. He was disoriented and barely able to breathe, overwhelmed by the scorching heat that pressed down on him from every direction. Suddenly, burning rocks rose from the ground and grabbed him by the limbs, holding him in place. They were alive, manifestations of the dream demon's will, each one moving with sinister intent. The voice of the dream demon echoed around him, low and cruel, as it reminded Lin that in this world he was the god and escape was impossible. Within the depths of Lin's dream, it seemed as if he was doomed to be trapped forever. The dream demon laughed with glee, circling him like a vulture, convinced that the little goblin was now powerless. He silently mocked the boy, wondering if he still had the courage to challenge him now that he was cornered inside the very nightmare he had tried to control. But then, without warning, a searing beam of flame erupted through the air, piercing one side of the dream demon's ethereal form. The creature howled in agony, writhing in disbelief as he staggered back. He couldn't understand what was happening. How was Lin able to attack him inside the dreamscape? Turning his gaze toward the goblin, the answer began to dawn on him. Lin was standing tall and completely unharmed. Slowly, Lin stepped out of the molten lava that had earlier seemed to engulf him. His eyes glinted with calm clarity. The lava, the suffocating heat, the pain, it was all fake. It was an illusion spun by fear itself. And Lin had already seen through it. He had realized that in this realm, fear was not just an emotion, it was a trap. The true power of the dream demon wasn't in physically restraining his victims, but in luring them into a mental death spiral, convincing them that they were doomed, and letting their own belief finish the job. The moment one accepted their end, the nightmare would turn real, and they would die within their mind. But Lin was not like the others. He acknowledged that the trick was clever and could easily fool weaker minds. But it simply wouldn't work on him. Deception like this was wasted effort. He called it foolish trickery beneath someone of his resolve. His mind couldn't be chained. Without hesitation, Lin summoned the swirling force of his aura and hurled it at the dream demon with brutal precision. The demon staggered, stunned and helpless, his voice caught in his throat as pain surged through him again and again. His eyes widened with disbelief as he tried to comprehend how Lin had gained the upper hand in a realm he alone should have ruled. Before the creature could recover, the scene snapped back to reality. Both Lin and the dream demon were expelled from the dreamscape, crashing into the real world. Wasting no time, Lin called upon his inventory, drawing out his flaming crossbow in a single fluid motion. Without even needing to aim twice, he unleashed a blinding barrage of fire. The arrows struck true, hammering the dream demon with merciless accuracy. There wasn't a single pause, not a single miss. The demon collapsed to the ground, coughing and twitching, trying to make sense of what was happening. He couldn't believe that he, a feared manipulator of minds and dreams, was losing, and to a goblin. Before he could gather his wits, Lin was already sprinting toward him. His speed was unnatural, like a blur racing through the air. In a heartbeat, he was on top of the dream demon, sinking his sharp teeth into the creature's shoulder. The demon screamed again, but it was too late. A soft chime echoed in Lin's ears as a system notification appeared before his eyes. A smile crept across his face. It had worked. He had successfully acquired the skill, dream manipulation. He no longer needed any demon or external entity to wield it. The power was now his alone. Lin's body began to shift subtly as the newly absorbed ability took root. The change wasn't pretty. His hand morphed grotesquely, muscles bulging and twisting unnaturally until a single crimson eye emerged from the center of his palm. The eye flickered with life and malice, pulsing as it scanned its surroundings. With it, Lin could now gaze directly into the minds of others and manipulate their dreams at will. Watching this transformation unfold, the Griffin was left stunned. He had seen many horrors, many miracles, but this defied logic. After the whole transmigration was done, Lin was smiling, having gained all the powers of the dream demon, while the flesh-eating Griffon came down onto the ground, asking Lin if he was all right. But the goblin turned around, telling his friend that it was nothing to worry about. The Griffon was actually scared and wondered how Lin managed to absorb the powers of the dream demon when he thought the goblin was stuck inside the nightmare forever. But Lin just ignored the question, telling the Griffon that it was all good and that they should hit the road as soon as possible. For him, the results were what mattered. And since the dream demon had already been punished, he wanted Gabu to take the position of the Southern Lord instead. Even the Griffon supported Lin, telling him that he would be keeping his back at the Grand Tomb forever. As the scene shifted, we returned to another area where, inside a camp, we saw that Alice was sleeping soundly, but deep inside, she was getting really scared. Lin started entering the dream of the lady with the help of a purple portal, which teleported him into the human town once again. Lin was happy when he saw the commotion all over, where a large number of people had gathered, blaming Alice for committing a hideous act. They wanted her to kill her goblin child, and then they would punish the female who had done such a disgusting act of giving birth to such an ugly species. According to them, someone in the holy orders could not commit such an unforgivable act, and it was completely outrageous. Inside the dream, Alice was constantly getting abused and insulted, being called a disgrace and the greatest shame in the history of the Sword Saints. Lin realized that the Sword Saint was already having a nightmare where the people were against her, and the dream was already tainted by 1,000 voices of people angry at the lady. Lin smiled, realizing that this was exactly the dream he needed to manipulate, and now his work would be easy. Suddenly, a golden light appeared out of nowhere, so bright that it blinded all the people who were chanting in anger. As they turned towards the source of the light, they saw an angel full of wings and a golden aura. They immediately believed that the creature was a great deity who had manifested himself to punish Alice personally. The people immediately bowed down in front of the great deity, unable to believe they had finally met the divine, and the feeling was amazing. But now the people called out to Alice, declaring that she was a blasphemous lady who had broken all the sacred rules, and now the deity should punish her and end her once and for all. The people started screaming at Alice again, saying she deserved 1,000 deaths for what she had done, because it was absolutely unforgivable. As the lady started backing away to save herself, a dark pit suddenly appeared below her feet, and just one step back would make her fall into the darkness. Alice wondered what she should do while the people continued approaching her, asking the great divine to take her out because what she did could not be forgiven. Now Alice didn't know what else to do other than lie down and scream in pain and agony, pleading to the great deity that she had always been praying to him and begging him to save her and forgive her for what she had done. We see that it was Lin who was posing as the great deity. He stopped the people from screaming by taking their voices away and asked Alice if she had any idea of the sin she had committed. The lady was shocked, but still told the great divine that she had slain those she was meant to protect, killing imperial soldiers and causing the death of comrades. But now the goblin started the manipulation, acting as the great divine and telling the lady that those were mere trifles that she thought were righteous, and she was just resting easy, thinking that by giving birth to goblins, she would be granted forgiveness. But that was not true. The lady was even more shocked, wondering if she had committed any other sins beyond killing. Lin, still transformed, told the lady that she had been protecting a bunch of demons who were nothing but selfish little scoundrels. They were greedy and lost in the allure of wine, lust, and wealth, always trying to dominate. They were a species aiming to be number one, even if it meant destroying everything. And for protecting such people, Alice was never going to find any forgiveness. The lady was now broken again inside her dream, realizing that what she had been doing was wrong and that she would not gain any forgiveness because she had been protecting not people, but actual demons all this time. Now, the nightmare took effect, turning all the people around the lady into demons. Alice now thought that this was their actual form. They were filthy demons who wanted nothing but to destroy everything. And the divine told her that by acting as people, they were actually doing sin after sin, and by protecting them, Alice was committing those sins too. Now the lady was completely manipulated, thinking that since the people were demons, they wanted the great divine to kill her. They blamed the lady, saying that she and the green-colored goblins were friends all along, and she should be ashamed of what she did and should be fed to the goblin. Now the demons were running towards the lady, getting ready to kill her on sight. But now Alice was actually angry. The manipulation had fully taken effect. She screamed at the demons, telling them not to dare say anything else. Once again, the lady had regained her power, screaming in anger and calling all the people devils, slaying them one by one, not hesitating for even a moment as she struck down all the goblins. She told the great deity that she had taken the life of a demon, and now, even though she had killed someone, she actually felt good. Even the great deity added fuel to the fire, telling the lady that the demons only wanted her to protect them, but never once thought of protecting her if something happened. And when she tumbled down from her pedestal, the first ones to abuse her and make her feel bad were the people who were actually demons. Now the great divine extended his hand to the Sword Saint, who was still crying but was now happy because she thought she finally understood her mission. She grabbed the hand of the great deity and decided to hunt down the wicked demons no matter where they were, because this was how she could reclaim her divine power. Even the great deity told her that when every last one of these demons was wiped out, she would get her divine powers back. Additionally, the great deity had already arranged for her to assist the emissary who was punishing the demons, and she had to make sure to lend him her utmost support. Now the lady was confused, wondering who the emissary was. But then she realized that it was none other than our boy, Lin himself. We see that Alice was sleeping while still having the nightmare. But now Lin got out and was laughing intensely because he never expected that his work would be so easy to do. He crouched down towards the lady, realizing that from now on, Alice would not be called the Sword Saint anymore because of what she was going to do. As the scene shifts, we come outside the tents, and after a bit of time passes, we see that inside Alice's room, there was a fruit basket along with some meat and non-vegetarian items. Meanwhile, Lin told the lady that they must fulfill the divine mission bestowed to them by the great deity, and Alice was shocked, wondering how Lin knew everything about this. It was then that the girl realized that maybe the guide the deity talked about was none other than the goblin Lin himself, who somehow knew everything. But Lin started smiling while putting a finger onto his lips, telling her that the divine will must not be revealed to anyone, not even the closest ones. Now Alice thought that Lin was the messenger spoken of by the divine in her dreams, and even though he was a goblin, Alice was ready to accept that. But as Lin started walking away from the tent, the lady immediately got up, asking him what she should do next. But Lin calmly walked away, telling her that he will be present at the place and time whenever the performance is required. The scene shifted once again to a rocky area filled with trees and mountains, where Lin was training Ifraya because she had been slacking off on her training for quite a while. Lin was not able to believe that the lady was only at level 16, and her total score was barely under 1,000. Now Ifraya was trembling, knowing that her master was angry, and she told him that she would definitely strive to improve. After Lin saw the whole notification panel of the lady, he got closer with a smile, grabbing her head and asking her how long she had been slacking off. Ifraya innocently told the goblin that she had only studied for a year, and now she was out in the Grand Tomb, gaining experience with her master, and there was still so much she hadn't learned yet. So that's why her level was really low. But Lin knew that even though he was mocking the lady, her talent was truly impressive and they couldn't let it go to waste. Another scene came over where a lot of goblins had been gathered, and Lin was addressing all of them with a mighty aura surrounding him, telling the creatures that a few hundred miles away from the Grand Tomb lay a human city called Klingberg, and there were a lot of treasures in that town. So the goblin leader wanted his army to go and plunder its treasures, its cuisine, and its women, so that they could enjoy all three and increase their reproduction base. The goblins started hooting and cheering for their leader, knowing that it was going to be fun. And as Lin saw that, he raised one hand into the air, telling the army to gear up because they would be heading out in no time. All the goblins were praising Lin, calling him a genius. But as the scene shifted, we see that Lin was back with Ifraya once again, as he told her that he had heard that the lord of the city was a white-hat wizard, and there were heaps of spellbooks there. So Lin wanted the lady to just follow him, and he would take her so that she could grab a spellbook to study and get powerful. Hearing that, Ifraya immediately dropped her head in endless gratitude because she was completely owned by her master chief. But someone heard everything from behind, wondering if they were going to Klingberg because they were a bit short on females, and that city had some beautiful ones. It was then that we saw the voice belonged to none other than the Sword Saint, who was now looking completely different, as Lin had provided her with an armor made completely out of dragon scales. Now Alice actually looked more like a mercenary than a Sword Saint. Lin was surprised that the lady had that kind of awareness and was not hesitating at all. But Alice turned around, telling the leader that she naturally had an understanding of his mission and what he wanted to do. But now Alice was going to support him too, because those damned, detestable demons who were taking the form of humans had inflicted a decade of torment upon her. So it was time for them to pay up, and Alice would make sure of it. The day passed on, and the next day arrived, where we see that Lin and another flying goblin were flying in the air, heading towards the town and surveying it. As they arrived, they saw that some kind of celebration was going on and a lot of humans were gathered. Lin immediately turned towards the goblin, telling him that he should stay at the camp and keep watch, while Lin was going to head over and check things out. The goblin agreed, and Lin started surveying the whole area. He saw the white hat wizard along with another female wizard who was present near him. We come to know that the old man was announcing something, and from that day on, he declared that his granddaughter, Avery, was going to be the new mayor of the town, making her the youngest female mayor in the entire history of the place. We come to know that the old man was Klein, who was the white hat mage and an 80-year-old individual. So he decided to appoint the arcane wizard Avery as the mayor of the city, and she was also a crimson hat wizard. After the announcement was made, everybody started cheering for Avery, immediately accepting her as their new mayor. The humans believed that it was an honor to be protected by the mighty family of wizards. Now it was Avery's turn to speak, and she thanked everyone for the congratulations while promising to surpass her grandfather's achievements and make sure that everyone in the town could live a happy life. She assured the people that she would never desecrate her holy duty, unlike the Sword Saint, whom she referred to as nothing but a wild woman. Furthermore, Avery became serious, telling everyone that there were reports suggesting that the Sword Saint had been spotted within their city. She requested that if any citizen saw her, they must report immediately, as the Sword Saint had to be delivered back to the Holy Temple to receive punishment and give the entire nation a proper explanation. The citizens, especially the younger ones, immediately agreed to whatever Avery said, eager to be her loyal dog simply because of her beauty and appearance. But the old man Klein immediately stepped in, praising her for thinking about the town and the empire right after taking office, saying it was a good sign. Meanwhile, Lin had completed his survey of the area and realized that Klingberg town was always well informed about the latest events in the empire. But even then, he hadn't expected the new lord of the town to make such a bold declaration on her very first day, one that was aimed at capturing the Sword Saint. Now Lin started laughing to himself, thinking it was absolutely fantastic, because Avery was going to meet Alice very soon, and she wouldn't be the same person Avery remembered. Lin returned after finishing the survey, and we see that the entire Goblin army, both hybrids and normal ones, was assembled, along with 3 females, the elven daughter Cassandra, Ifraya, and Alice. Cassandra asked Lin how the survey had gone, and the boy began explaining that he had gathered complete information about the city's military strength, which was a little short of 6,000, and most of the soldiers were currently concentrated in the castle. That meant the outer defenses of the city were weak, especially because a celebration was ongoing. Knowing this was the perfect opportunity, Lin gave the order to his goblin army to break down the gates right away, flying towards the city again while the goblins followed him at incredible speed. As the scene shifts to the outer guard of the town, we see that a group of hybrid goblins, along with some normal ones, were ready with a giant log to smash the main gate of the kingdom. 2 guards were standing on top of the castle, noticing that a goblin invasion had begun and that they were coming in large numbers. One of them told the other to go and notify the lord immediately. But before that could happen, both guards were suddenly struck by super-fast arrows, not even getting the chance to dodge them. We see that these arrows were shot from something that looked like a makeshift gun made by none other than our boy, Lin. It was used by the elves, who were now praising Lin even more, since this makeshift gun was easier to use than a bow or a crossbow. Now that all the soldiers were down, it became easy for the goblins to break open the main gate of the city. They finally reached the main hall, ready to enjoy every bit of their praise. They were ordered by Lin, who was flying on his dragon, to destroy the big weapon first and then gather at his position. As the scene shifted, goblins were already wreaking havoc, and there was fire everywhere. Seeing that, Avery and her father wondered about the noise, and their celebration immediately came to an end as they turned around and started heading toward the fire. Everyone saw a huge dragon in the sky and immediately panicked, realizing it was a far greater threat than they had imagined. There was no use in fighting it. Even though Avery told everyone not to panic, it was already too late. She immediately ordered all those who could reach the shelter to head in first so they could save themselves. While the civilians were running toward the shelter, Avery's grandfather started flying into the sky to get a reconnaissance view of everything. After analyzing the situation, he told all the guards to be on the front lines because the goblins were invading and heading toward the main ceremonial ground. Avery was shocked at the mention of goblins, but even she was acting carelessly, immediately relaxing and assuming the goblins were just lower-level monsters. She ordered the soldiers to deal with them quickly and promised they would have a drink when they returned. The soldiers immediately agreed with what their new settlement leader had said and started heading toward the goblins. Avery started shouting again in her usual tone, telling everyone to carry on with their missions because it was still her birthday. In the name of the Klin family, she would distribute food and gifts to all the soldiers who killed goblins so the common people wouldn't have to worry. After that, as the scene shifted again, we saw that from the fire emerged multiple hybrid goblins who were mercilessly slaying the soldiers who had come in hopes of receiving rewards. These goblins were clearly not the weak ones Avery had imagined. They completely dominated the area without much effort. As the scene changed again, we saw the old wizard coming face to face with Lin, complimenting him on being able to control a dragon. Seeing that, the old man immediately realized that a goblin with a dragon must mean that Lin was the one who led the Sword Saint to her downfall. Hearing that, Lin smiled, saying he didn't expect his fame to spread so much. But it made no difference to the old man, who was ready to attack regardless. He immediately summoned his magic and told Lin that he was troublesome, so it was important for the wizard to take action. He asked Lin if a goblin had ever considered the consequences of charging toward a wizard with such power. Then we saw the wizard smiling devilishly as he summoned some kind of frozen gem, which was glowing with a faint blue color. As the wizard manipulated it, a huge asteroid began falling from the sky. It broke apart slightly due to the planet's gravity, and it was completely made of ice. Lin was shocked. He hadn't expected something that massive to appear so suddenly. Before the asteroid could reach him, he moved to get out of its trajectory. But the game wasn't over yet. The old man, Clint, was able to control the trajectory of the asteroid with his magic and the crystal. Lin started smiling, knowing that this chase wasn't going to end so easily. He leaned forward on his dragon and told the old man that if a chase was what he wanted, then he should have a gift that was grandly prepared by the goblin leader himself. Now Lin wasn't facing the old man directly. Instead, he headed toward the villagers at insane speeds. When they saw the goblin leader approaching, the villagers immediately wet their pants in fear. It wasn't just the dragon that scared them, but the figure riding it too. Lin looked like an evil version of Batman. The civilians ran away, screaming for help, even when they knew there was no one who could help them now. Meanwhile, as the asteroid's trajectory continued to follow Lin, everyone realized that if it hit the land, it would be their end. Even Avery realized what Lin was doing. He was heading toward the civilians on purpose. Realizing this was bad, she started to panic, knowing Lin was planning something. At that moment, Lin told the red dragon to use the skills she had mastered. Hearing that, the dragon immediately bent her head and used her firepower to propel herself and Lin out of the asteroid's path. As a result, the asteroid was now heading straight for the main building of the city, instead of chasing Lin and the dragon. The wizard Avery was shocked to see a meteorite about to crash onto their castle. She immediately used her transcendent magic so that a portal could be opened in time. A black teleportation portal appeared, and as it ripped apart, they could see outer space, where the meteorite was falling through, safely going outside into space without touching even a brick of the castle. After taking the whole asteroid in, the portal's work was finished, and it began disappearing. Avery sighed in relief, thinking that everything was over. But just then, she noticed that her main opponent was already gone due to her carelessness in focusing on the asteroid instead of the goblin leader. She was frustrated, thinking that just when she had met the leader, he had vanished after playing tricks. As the scene shifted to another place, an old man, referred to as a grandfather, looked at Lin and his mighty dragon who were flying high in the sky. The old man wondered where his asteroid had gone. Hearing this, Lin just chuckled, then had a straight face, telling the old man that it was due to his granddaughter that the asteroid was gone, and that if it hadn't happened, the whole castle would have been turned into smithereens. Lin was shocked that the old man wasn't actually concerned about that, and was simply thinking about beating him. Just then, another soldier came behind the old man, barely hanging on because the goblins had taken off one of his hands. He pleaded for help from the healing magic the old man possessed. The man turned around and, seeing the soldier's agony, immediately used his healing arts. His skill was named Earth Nurturing's Embrace Asterisk, which started healing the wounds of the hand. But Lin saw it as an opportunity and immediately threw a fireball toward the old man, aiming to take advantage of his guard being down. However, the grandfather wasn't ready to give up and immediately put up a small barrier to cover both himself and the soldier he was healing. It was getting difficult for him to do two things at once. Now the old man was frustrated. He cursed the goblins, shouting that if they wanted to fight, they should do it fairly and not toy with just an old man. Hearing that, Lin smiled and asked if he was seriously trying to morally blackmail a goblin. Because even when Lin had been a human in his previous life, the goblins he had been training were goblins their entire life. They had no morals or ethics in fighting. They simply wanted to hunt their prey by any means necessary. The old man realized that he had underestimated the goblin leader because, at this rate, their grand army would surely be devoured by the goblins in no time, and they wouldn't be able to do anything about it. The old man decided to retreat and told the soldiers to hold the fortress so no one could come inside. The soldiers began running, hoping they would retreat safely, while all the goblins surrounded them, trying to get through the main gate of the castle. All the soldiers also led the civilians inside, telling them to enter the castle, while a few defended the main gate so the others could survive. But the goblins were actually turning the tide and killing the soldiers with ease. The defenders decided to block the main entrance and close the heavy gate, thinking they were now safe. The soldiers fighting the goblin soldiers realized these were no normal goblins. They were a squad of elite warriors. The soldiers knew they had already lost 3,000 men in this instant battle, while the goblins had lost barely a few hundred. It was not a fair comparison at all. Meanwhile, the civilians were all struck with fear after witnessing what had happened, wondering if they had any chance of survival, especially if the Sword Saint had been with them. But hearing this, Avery got frustrated and told everyone not to forget what she had said and what she had proclaimed. She reminded the civilians once again that the Klin family would not let anything happen to the people of the city, and that they would defeat the goblins and their entire army, no matter what. They were sure that the soldiers and high-class mages inside the castle would protect them, as the place was considered the strongest fortress. No one could even step inside, no matter how strong the monster was, and they would not be able to touch the civilians, even if they tried. As multiple soldiers fought the goblins on foot, the mages were casting multiple spells to reduce the number of goblins attacking them. Meanwhile, Lin knew that he was at a disadvantage and told all the goblins to retreat first, so they could work on another plan. But on the other hand, the old man and his granddaughter Avery thought their plan was working, and that the goblins were now scared. They believed they had effortlessly taken down over 10 high-tier goblin species, and that these filthy creatures would not even dare approach the castle again. The old man started boasting, thinking the goblin leader couldn't do anything. He asked if that was all the skill Lin had, because even after defeating the Sword Saint, if not for the surprise attack, Lin would have been dead long ago. Hearing that, Avery was surprised, while Lin listened with a slight smile. Avery realized that Lin was the goblin leader who had defeated the Sword Saint. She wondered if she could beat him, then it meant she was stronger than the Sword Saint herself. The old man started laughing, telling his dear granddaughter that she was right, and that the goblin leader Lin was merely a stepping stone for her glorious future. But he knew for sure that Avery was going to have a bright future with Lin, no matter what, though perhaps in a different way than what she was thinking. On the other hand, Lin was now getting really frustrated because he never intended to wipe out the civilians along with the main forces of the city. But since they were so oblivious to the danger, Lin told them not to blame him for what was coming next. Avery, full of herself, thought Lin was just making bold claims without the power to back them up. She wondered if he still intended to turn the world upside down with his measly powers. But Lin said nothing. He decided to let his actions speak instead. He covered his face and started moving in another direction, ordering some of the hybrid goblins to come with him while telling the others to stay put. All the humans assumed Lin was retreating, thinking they had won. Avery wanted to stop the goblins' retreat. When one soldier approached her, she told him that magic barriers were already set up for the refuge, which were impenetrable. There was no way they could break through and reach the main parts of the castle. As the scene shifted, we saw Lin facing difficulty with his dragon because there was a yellow barrier protecting the place. But one of the hybrids stepped forward, telling his boss to step back and let him give it a shot to test his power on the barrier. The hybrid goblin started powering up like a Super Saiyan, getting really serious. His menacing hands bulged with veins, signifying his true power. The whole earth started shaking, and the barrier showed micro-stutters. The old man witnessed everything and realized the barrier they were so proud of was definitely going to break. And just like that, after a while, the entire barrier broke, and the main gate to the castle was now wide open. All the civilians were shivering with fear, realizing they were done for. Some wondered where Avery was and why she wasn't there when it was time to save them. Others began to think the Sword Saint wasn't so bad after all, and if she had been there, they might have been rescued by now. After breaking the main gate, Lin decided that since the people inside the castle weren't coming out, he would have to find a way to make them. And the civilians were gladly going to help him in this task. So Lin decided to do what goblins do best. Everything spiraled out of control the moment Lin, the enigmatic goblin leader, issued the command for a total siege on Clintburg Fortress. Without delay, swarms of goblins surged into the outer districts, launching an unrestrained massacre against the helpless. Age, gender, innocence, it mattered not. The streets ran red with blood as the screams of the dying echoed through the air. Desperate and heartsick, the fortress soldiers begged Lord Clint to lower the gates so they could rush to the aid of the citizens. But the seasoned lord, bound by experience and bitter understanding, knew that doing so would only hasten their annihilation. Their only hope lay in fortifying their position and enduring. What disturbed him most, however, was how the city's magical barrier, constructed over generations by the finest mages, had been obliterated so swiftly. It made no sense. Something was terribly wrong. Yet the soldiers, driven by fear and love for their families, couldn't comprehend the scale of the enemy they faced. Several began dismantling the wooden blockades near the gate, frantic to escape. Avery shouted for them to stop, urging restraint, telling them the mages were doing all they could to maintain the defenses. But her words were drowned by a sharp, unnatural sound. Turning around, she gasped in horror. Her father had collapsed, blood trickling from a brutal gash on his head. The attacker revealed herself in the worst possible way, the Elf Queen, leading her people with weapons unfamiliar to the battlefield. Though crude by technological standards, the elves' firearms were unmatched in this world's warfare. From the shadows and elevated vantage points, they picked off defenders with terrifying accuracy. As more elves appeared at the base of the fortress wall, panic swept over Avery. She couldn't understand why the elves were siding with goblins, nor how their weapons possessed such devastating firepower. Nearby, Clay was holding off the gunfire with a magical shield, but even he could feel the tide turning. Whether it made sense or not, the truth was plain. The elves had declared humans their enemies. And then the Elf Queen's voice rang out, sharp, commanding, and full of righteous fury. She called her sisters to arms, declaring that now was the time to repay the cruelty their kind had suffered at human hands. Their weapons raised as one, the elves took aim at the soldiers near the main gates. Sensing the impending bloodbath, Lord Clint unleashed a high-tier spell, Heaven's Gate. A massive arch of blinding silver light descended from above, forming a divine barrier between the retreating civilians and the advancing enemy. Gasping for breath, Clint turned to his granddaughter and urged her to flee. The spell was powerful, but even he could not sustain it for long. Before he could finish, a soldier burst through the crowd, panicked and breathless, delivering grim news. The rear exit had been overrun. Goblins had circled around and now surrounded the fortress from all sides. Clint felt a cold dread settle in his bones. Goblins, creatures once beneath notice, had managed to outmaneuver, overpower, and completely encircle them. How had it come to this? Nearby, a trembling man looked to Avery with desperation. He begged her to do something, anything. Surely the city's leader could stop this. Surely she wasn't so powerless as to stand by and watch them be butchered like cattle. Before anyone could respond, someone shouted and pointed skyward. All eyes turned as the unmistakable figure of Sword Saint Alice appeared atop a nearby rooftop. Relief rippled through the crowd. Cheers broke out. Someone cried out that they were saved. Others shouted her name, desperate for protection. In this kingdom, there was no greater symbol of strength and justice than the Sword Saint. But joy quickly turned to horror. Alice vanished from her perch in an instant, reappearing at the barrier Clint had cast. Her sword, radiant and blinding, gleamed as she brought it down with unimaginable force. With a single swing, Heaven's Gate was obliterated. The shockwave was so immense that it hurled Avery from the battlements, her body crashing violently to the ground below. The golden slash didn't stop there. It surged forward, tearing through stone, magic, and hope. Clint scrambled to raise another barrier, casting in desperation. But even he, hailed as the greatest white-robed mage of his generation, was powerless. The moment the two forces collided, his spell shattered like glass. The impact threw him from the wall, his body crumpling like a broken doll. When he lifted his gaze, Alice stood on the parapet above, aloof, indifferent. Her cold eyes surveyed the chaos she had created, untouched by the screams or the ruin. With rage and despair twisting his voice, Clint shouted at her. Had she gone mad? Did she not see the evil she was aiding? But Alice gave no answer. Her silence was more chilling than any accusation. She merely stared down at them all with the gaze of someone long detached from humanity. Clint knew then that they had lost her, and with her perhaps the war itself. He turned to Avery and warned her that Alice was no longer who she once was. They had to retreat into the castle. Without waiting, he ran, abandoning the outer walls and the citizens he had sworn to protect. Cries of betrayal erupted behind him. Civilians screamed, begging their lord not to leave them. He had promised them safety. Above them, Lin descended on his dragon, his voice a seductive whisper in Alice's ear. He reminded her that these people had once called for her crucifixion, labeling her a fallen sinner in need of redemption. They were demons wearing human skins, weren't they? His words sank deep, and Alice responded. Like a star crashing from the heavens, she dropped into the heart of the crowd. Terror exploded among them. They shouted that it wasn't true, that Avery had deceived her. They pleaded with her not to believe the goblins, that they had always supported her. But she offered no mercy. Her blade struck like judgment. With a single swing, she beheaded the nearest man. That one act marked the point of no return. Coldly, she declared her disgust. She was tired of demons pretending to be human. If they had once used their swords to kill monsters, then today she would use those very swords to judge them instead. Fear became a storm. Civilians scrambled for the castle gates, stumbling, sobbing, begging for their lives. But Alice followed, slowly, like a specter of death. Their cries echoed off the walls. Please don't kill us, have mercy. But mercy never came. Within seconds, the screams were silenced. Blood painted the entrance crimson, bodies collapsed one over another, motionless. And from that moment forward, the woman once known as Alice, the revered sword saint, was no longer a guardian of the realm. She had become something else entirely. A fallen angel. As Lin was looking at the fallen angel Alice, he was surprised because her condition reminded him of someone who had spent a lifetime saving the world and its people, yet was nailed to the cross by the very ones he had saved. But as she did not possess the same genuine heart and goodness as that man, she was far easier to control. And Lin was kind of liking this new and wild look that the short saint was showing now. Or rather, he should call her the fallen angel. Lin knew that, rather than being forced into death, Alice would now much rather watch others meet their doom. And that was true to some extent. As the scene shifted, a hybrid goblin with multiple hands was thrown out of a building that collapsed moments later. Avery had used her powers to do it after being threatened by the goblin. She still couldn't believe that the sword saint had actually betrayed humanity and become the fallen angel. Otherwise, there was no way Avery would have ended up in this state. Her clothes tattered, revealing more than she would have liked. Avery wanted the fallen angel to wait until she became the grand sorcerer. She was determined that once that happened, she would beat everything out of the lady. She tried to escape, going deeper into the castle, but just then she saw a small goblin trembling as he drew his knife. He couldn't bring himself to attack and instead begged her not to kill him. He swore he'd never hurt another human and pleaded for her to let him go. Though Avery was disgusted, she couldn't bring herself to harm a child. So she told the goblin he was lucky this time, but warned him never to appear before her again, otherwise, next time wouldn't end the same way. Avery turned away in disgust, slinging a bag over her shoulder. The goblin child remained silent, then slowly began laughing, a chilling sound. Avery felt irritated and disgusted at how the filthy goblin had delayed her from meeting her grandfather in the secret passage. Even though she had been ready to kill him, he was still a child. But everything changed in an instant. Suddenly, she felt something slide into her throat, something sharp and cold, the dagger. The small goblin had slashed her neck, just barely missing a vital point. Avery screamed in pain and disbelief. She had spared this child while he cried, and he had faked it all to stab her. Her legs gave out as she dropped to the ground, watching red flames flicker around the boy as he laughed and mocked her, calling her his little sister. It was then revealed that the boy was none other than Lin himself, who had used a transformation technique to disguise himself as a child. Now he taunted Avery, saying she never should have trusted a goblin, not even in a million years, and she would now face the consequences of her actions. Lin realized that the girl was simply too full of herself, and that arrogance had led to her downfall. He had come to the castle seeking a spellbook, but had discovered something far more appealing, a fully grown, striking woman. And now, what he was getting was far better than any book could offer. Avery, trembling in fear, revealed to Lin that the spellbook he wanted was in the castle's secret chamber, and she could guide him there. She begged him to let her go and not to eat her, but Lin made his intentions clear. He did want to eat her, but not in the way she was thinking, and he added it would be quite an experience. Lin crouched down near Avery's face, asking why she was so afraid. Wasn't she the one who had once sought to capture the Sword Saint and wipe out the entire Goblin clan? Avery, now fully exposed, admitted that it had only been a speech to gain support. It had never been her real intention. She began begging the Goblin leader to spare her. But as the lady's expression shifted so quickly, Lin felt disgusted. He knew she was lying. It became clear to him that Avery couldn't be trusted, not even a little. A devilish glow flickered in Lin's eyes, and Avery realized that something terrible was about to happen. Suddenly, Lin pounced on her, grabbing both her hands and pinning them against the wooden wall. He began seizing her legs, calmly telling her that she still had many life lessons to learn. According to Lin, it was good that Avery didn't become the city lord, because with how well she could lie, the people would have surely suffered. But even as Lin spoke those words, his actions didn't match them. He began going places the girl hadn't even imagined. As he continued, a notification popped up in his system, informing him that his attack, defense, and health had increased by 80, 100, and 200 points respectively. Once everything was over, Lin began dressing himself, leaving the lady completely exposed. Even he couldn't believe just how delicate Avery was, how everything shattered with just a bit of pressure. Lin chuckled to himself, remarking that the city lord's precious air was a bit too weak. But just then, he heard a strange, familiar voice screaming at him, furious, accusing him of tainting his granddaughter. Lin turned and saw it was none other than Avery's grandfather. The old man charged toward him at insane speeds, kicking up a tornado as he moved. Realizing he had no time to waste, Lin braced himself and let out a powerful goblin howl. The two clashed at point-blank range. Dust and smoke filled the air, but Lin, still full of stamina and blessed with great agility, leapt away just in time to protect himself. As the dust cleared, Lin confirmed his suspicion. It really was the old man. And now he was holding a massive Rasengan in his hand, a clearly Win-style technique, and one Lin recognized instantly. It had been a close call, but it wasn't over. The old man roared that he would wipe out all the filthy goblins, calling them wicked and disgusting creatures who didn't deserve to live. He charged, Rasengan in hand, even mimicking the pose of Naruto, as if he were the true hero of this story. But just as the old man launched into the air, something came flying at him with terrifying speed. It pierced through the ground and exploded into him, blasting him away and forcing him to cough blood. The man instantly recognized the weapon. It was the sword used by the Sword Saint. He was thrown from the building, crashing down. As he fell, he saw Alice, who still hadn't finished her assault. A faint red aura radiated from her blade as she prepared for the next strike. Without hesitation, the sword flew through the air, piercing the old man's chest and pinning him to the ground. He collapsed unconscious. It was then revealed that the fallen angel Alice was now dressed far more revealingly than when she had been the Sword Saint. Even Lin smiled as he looked at her, stunned that the transformed version of the saint could be even more terrifying than before. The old man hadn't even had time to cast a single spell. He'd been taken out in an instant. As Lin walked toward her, Alice asked if there was anyone else she needed to kill. Lin smiled and told her they were pretty much done for now. Things should be quiet for a while. The scene then shifted to the secret chamber's library, where Lin strolled alongside Ephraia. She was in awe. Hundreds of advanced magical skills were stored within, not to mention 10 types of transcendent spells, 3 ultimate-tier magic books, and even a world-class spell. Lin chuckled and told her that if she liked it so much, she should just take everything. Hearing that, the lady was overjoyed. She immediately bowed and thanked her master, promising that once she had mastered her studies, she would serve him even better and do whatever he asked of her. But just then, Lin turned around and noticed something else. Gold coins and treasures were pouring onto the floor, forming a great heap. See that so many treasures were lying untouched inside the castle. Even he couldn't understand why they were just sitting there. Ray, too, wondered what was going on. Though he knew that the money found here couldn't be used in the human world, Ephraia had the power to grow money through alchemy, and its currency was accepted everywhere. It didn't even exist in the demi-human world, making this a truly rare and valuable find. Lin made a smart decision to keep the treasure with him, just in case. The scene shifted suddenly. A large glass shattered on the ground, thrown violently by none other than the king himself. He was furious, unable to accept the contents of the report. Alice, a sword saint, had joined forces with the goblins and was now responsible for the massacre of soldiers and civilians, the very people a sword saint was meant to protect. The king refused to believe it. He warned the guards that if even a single word in the report was false, he would personally execute every last one of them without mercy. He demanded again, with rising anger, whether the report was true. But the royal guards didn't hesitate. They bowed low and confirmed it. Everything was true. Alice had indeed become a fallen angel. The king could hardly believe it. He had never imagined that a ragtag group of goblins could go so far. But before he could process the shock, another soldier burst into the hall, bringing even worse news. The city of Clintford had fallen. The goblins had invaded and overrun Clintford completely. Elder Clint, the head wizard, made a final stand to protect the city. But then Alice arrived with the goblins, shattered the castle gates, and led a brutal assault that wiped out thousands, including Elder Clint himself. The king stood frozen as the truth hit him harder with every passing second. A noble and holy sword saint had pointed her blade at her own people for the sake of goblins. No matter how he looked at it, it was pure madness. But the king was not one to surrender to despair. As the ruler of the Lionheart Empire, he swore that he would repay everything that had been done to his family and his nation. He gave a direct order for the soldiers to summon all the ministers. He would call upon the old pope because things had gone too far. Without delay, the castle filled once again with the empire's most powerful officials. The king stood tall and addressed them all. He said that everyone already knew of Clintford's fall. For the Lionheart Empire, this marked one of the most painful and unforgettable days in history. It must be etched into their hearts and bones, never to be forgotten. Now they would declare war on the goblin tribes. They would reclaim Ephraia and rebuild Clintford Castle. Gasps echoed through the hall. No one had expected the king to declare open war on the goblins, let alone attempt to reclaim Ephraia. Then an old man stood. He had understood the meaning behind the king's words and suspected why he had been summoned. He was none other than the Pope of the Lionheart Empire. He asked quietly if the king had truly made up his mind, because declaring war on the goblins also meant declaring war against the Grand Tomb itself. The king, driven by emotion and duty, replied that his time was coming to an end. He wished to leave behind a peaceful and stable kingdom. The Grand Tomb had always been a lurking danger, and it could no longer be ignored. But everyone present understood the gravity of the situation. The Grand Tomb was no ordinary threat. It was a nightmare even to goblins. If they were to go through with this, they had to be fully prepared. The Pope, seeing that the king had made his decision, rose and instructed the soldiers to send word to every temple across the land. All forces were to gather at the empire's heart. The soldiers began their preparations. As the king declared loudly, "Victory will once again belong to the Lionheart Empire. It always has." Meanwhile, multiple goblins returned from the raid, heading back toward the Grand Tomb. The inside of the massive structure seemed to stretch endlessly. No matter how much loot Lin had taken, it didn't even make a dent in the space. Elsewhere inside, Lin found himself once again talking to the man-eating eagle. He was confused as to why the eagle had flown directly into the region Lin ruled. It was then revealed that the esteemed one had commanded the eagle to bring Lin into the grand tomb for a stroll. The eagle advised Lin not to be too anxious. Such things could happen. Lin was shocked to learn he'd be going deeper into the grand tomb. Still, he didn't refuse. He mounted his dragon and soared through the sky beside the man-eating eagle. As they flew, Lin looked down in awe. The land below was freezing cold, and yet strangely it was filled with vegetation, something that should have been impossible. The eagle explained that the castle below had been built by werewolves, and their king was a level 10 beast. He had survived only thanks to the temples, enduring countless hardships for over 10 years. Lin was stunned. He hadn't even known werewolves existed in this world, but he reminded himself this place defied all logic. Anything was possible. He recalled rumors that werewolves and vampires shared some kind of connection. He made a mental note to investigate further. As the two flew deeper, Lin thought about the structure of the grand tomb. It wasn't just ruled by 4 great lords, it also sheltered many exotic races. These races were often hunted or mistreated by humans. Eventually, they arrived at a dark, desolate castle. The eagle and Lin landed near its entrance. As Lin stepped off his dragon, he heard the crunch of bones beneath his boots. The ground was littered with lifeless remains. He ordered the dragon to stay behind and entered the castle with the eagle. After some time, they triggered a magic circle beneath their feet. Though it was new to Lin, the eagle remained calm. He explained that this was just a lift. It would take them down to the master. The magical elevator brought them through multiple floors, at times leaving them floating in midair. Eventually, they arrived at the lowest level. Lin looked around, stunned by the vastness and darkness of the place. It truly felt like a grand grave. All around, exotic beings stared at him. He saw cyclopes, hydras, and even undead necromancers. Lin realized he was standing in a monster farm of epic scale. Suddenly, the monsters parted. Someone far more powerful had entered the scene. The camera of the story zoomed in on a throne made of bones. Seated on it was a figure cloaked in darkness, a master of death magic and ruler of the grand tomb. A level 100 spirit lord, radiating energy with strength surpassing 10,000 points. Lin's smile turned nervous. He couldn't believe the sheer power this being held. And to think that this being was once defeated by humans, forced into a treaty, it made him all the more cautious. He bowed deeply and greeted the throne's occupant with flattery, calling them esteemed and handsome. The man-eating eagle shook his head. Lin was being far too casual, and it was setting off alarm bells. But before anything went wrong, a soft laugh rang out. A woman beside the throne leaned forward with a smile, calling Lin a little boy. She told him that the king of the grand tomb was actually a queen. Lin blinked in surprise. The ruler of the grand tomb was a woman. The Bone Queen herself finally spoke. She had already heard of Lin's deeds in the Magic City. Now, both women, clearly powerful, were curious and impressed to hear that he had even swayed the Wood Saint to join his cause. And so, Lin's journey into the depths of the Grand Tomb had truly begun.